Hi, I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, and welcome to episode 591 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show we'll be discussing the short story collection The Top of the Volcano, the award-winning stories of Harlan Ellison, and reviewing 11 stories from the book that didn't appear in the collection Harlan Ellison's Greatest Hits, which we reviewed back in episodes 583 and 586. And those stories are A Boy and His Dog, The Region Between, Basilisk, Adrift just off the Islets of Langerhans, latitude 38 degrees 54 minutes north, longitude 77 degrees 0 minutes 13 seconds west, Croatoan, Count the Clock That Tells the Time, with Virgil Oddum at the East Pole, Soft Monkey, The Function of Dream Sleep, The Man Who Rode Christopher Columbus Ashore, and The Human Operators. And this will include spoilers for all of those stories, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined today by my good friend Tom Gerencer, making his 34th appearance on the show. He's the author of the business book Think Like Google, the short story collection Intergalactic Refrigerator Repairmen Seldom Carry Cash, and the popular science book How It's Made, which he wrote for the Discovery Channel. His middle grade novel The Magic Ski Mountain is out now. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so we're going to be starting off with a very famous Harlan Ellison story. This is, I mentioned, one of my favorite Harlan Ellison stories that I read as a kid. It's called A Boy and His Dog. And so this story, it's set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, a sort of Mad Max kind of wasteland where rape and murder are just everyday occurrences. And the main characters are a teenage boy who's grown up in this wasteland and so is completely, at least initially, seems completely selfish and amoral. And he has a companion named Blood, who's a dog. And this dog, it has been bred to be, is the result of a breeding experiment that happens before the war, where he's been genetically altered to be super intelligent and telepathic. But as a result of these modifications, he's also lost his natural dog hunting instincts. So he's completely dependent on humans to feed him. And so Vic and Blood have this partnership where Vic provides Blood with food, and Blood uses his telepathy and incredibly good sense of smell to find women for Vic to assault. And so that's sort of the setup. And then the inciting incident is that they come across a young woman who has named Quilla June Holmes, who's different from anyone that Vic's ever met before. She's sort of a middle-class girl who grew up in a giant city underground, a sort of, bomb shelter kind of giant city underground where they have preserved middle-class suburban life. And she wants Vic to come with her back to her home. And this causes a big rift between Vic and Blood, the dog, because Blood does not trust this woman. So, Tom, you had never read this before, right?
I hadn't. And you said this was one of your favorite stories. Is that correct? One of your favorite Ellison. Fair to say. One of your favorite Ellison stories, or one of your favorite stories, period?
It's definitely one of my favorite Ellison. It's one of my top 5 Ellison stories for sure, but I would put it probably in a list of my all-time. I mean, it might be a big list of 50 stories or something, but I think it would be on there. I just really like the story a lot.
Okay,
I think it's sort of foundational to science fiction. And I guess I hadn't really realized it until just rereading it, how strongly this influenced like the Fallout video games, right? Where just this idea of the 50s kind of perpetuating in bomb shelters in a post-apocalyptic future.
Huh.
But I can imagine it must be a very different experience for you reading it now than me reading it as a teenager. So kind of what was
it was, and I think my tastes are very different to yours, because I know you like a lot of the stuff you've recommended that I read it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, is that stark or is that brutal? And I think I'm a little squeamish, so stuff like that kind of isn't my thing. And this story made me think a lot of. I can see where you say it's foundational. I was thinking, oh, okay, that makes sense. And also, I have a friend who's a musician who I always try to understand, like, so this song that you love, is really bleak and it's really stark and brutal. And I don't understand the attraction to things like that. And he says, well, it's not trying to solve anything. It's not trying to take you anywhere new or teach you anything. It's just trying to convey an emotion. It's trying to, even if that emotion is awful. And I don't necessarily think that this story is trying to do that, but I do think there is a lot to that in people's tastes, and that is not in my particular taste in art or fiction. I don't know why. I think I'm just squeamish. And so when I read this story, it reminded me a lot of Natural Born Killers. In a lot of ways, the movie that Quentin Tarantino disowned because he thought when the director made it, it was just too violent, too awful. I don't remember who directed it, but I remember Tarantino wrote it and then disowned it. And I have the same feeling there. I have friends who love that movie and say like, oh, it's so awesome. You got to love it. And I watch it and I go, I can see that it's an awesome movie. I can see that it's very well created, just like this story. I can see that it's an awesome story, that it's very well written, that it's very well composed, that it really hits you emotionally, but it's not the kind of thing that I enjoy. And so it kind of misses my taste. And we can talk more about Ellison and that kind of thing later, because I saw a really cool interview where he discusses that very problem, that some people find that a problem and some people don't. And he talked about like why he gravitates toward that kind of stuff. But that's my overall impression of it. It was very brutal. It was very stark. It was very grisly. There's like depictions of sexual abuse and just being, like almost institutionalized sexual abuse, almost gleeful sexual abuse, and that kind of thing. And then there's, patricide and all that stuff was just so brutal to me that I was just like, I can see that this is very well done and I can see why it's a seminal work, but it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah, well, there's no question that this is a dark story. I mean, I think, and that was sort of Ellison's, thing. I think, he edited the Dangerous Visions anthologies where the idea was that the science fiction field was just too, playing it too safe, and it was time for people to push the boundaries and be edgier and provocative. And so I think this definitely goes along with that. But I guess I'll start out just talking about the characters, because I think that these characters of Vic and Blood are really interesting characters. You have the human who's kind of animalistic, and the animal, the dog, who's sort of more cultured and urbane and is trying to do what he can to preserve history and civilization and things like that. And I just think that character dynamic is really just really well done. And a lot of Ellison stories, the characters are not often well done. But I think he really hit on something there that really works. So I guess, do you agree with that? Just sticking with the characters, did you find them? Did you find that dynamic interesting at all?
Yeah, I did. I like that. I found it kind of similar to Zelazny's A Night in the Lonesome October, where he's got the Jack the Ripper's dog is, not the same dynamic, obviously, but the dog is kind of this noble, loyal kind of character, and then Jack the Ripper is very complicated anti-hero in that book, and it kind of reminded me of that dynamic there. I really do like that. I thought that was kind of cool how the dog was like, hey, you got to kind of chill out here, or you got to reject your baser instincts. You got to help me a little bit. I just didn't, the whole concept of here's this super intelligent dog who can talk. And there's lots of them. They don't say exactly how many, but there's lots of them at least scattered around this one city. And these pairs of like super intelligent dogs and human males who just like their whole existence is just like, let's find food and let's find a woman that we can abuse and, sexually abuse and rape and I think quite often murder. And they're all kind of fighting over like, who's going to do this? And then they all go and like hang out in movie theaters together and watch movies. And, it's that part of it. Certainly the character dynamic was cool, but the other part of it was like, I I don't understand. I couldn't understand until I watched the interview I talked about. I couldn't understand, like, why would he want to show you this? Like, what is I don't know, how would this society evolve, and why is this something that I want to look at, I guess?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction where, after, where after civilization collapses, people, it's just chaos. You have stuff like, Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I mean, there's just this whole genre.
Yeah,
of
Road Warrior, right? That's very
in Mad Max. Yeah. I mean, do you dislike all of it, or do you like any of those? Because I mean, there's like rape and stuff and cannibalism and everything in many of those kinds of stories.
Well, I love Mad Max and I love Road Warrior, but I have to look away. I don't like those parts. I don't like the rape and murder parts in them. I love the story because it's like an Arthurian legend, right? It's very similar to an Arthurian story. It's like there's this knight wandering the wasteland looking for a quest, and he finds these people and helps them and saves them, but the salvation is not for him. He doesn't get to share in it. And I love that part of it, but I can't stand the other. But they make the other stuff so sort of backgroundy, and they make it kind of like, okay, we want to show you why this is bad and why he has to come save people. So I'm like, okay, well, I can deal with that. But to have the main character be the guy who's like, I am the bad thing in the world, was hard to figure out. Like, how am I going to root for this guy? And then even, when they get to the end and he's down in that world, and I know Ellison's sensibility and his critique, his social commentary on middle-class suburbia and on, the kind of cultural norms and the Judeo-Christian ethic of the United States of America in the 1960s and 70s and so forth, how he found that abhorrent. But his answer to it seems almost like this Charles Manson, like helter skelter, let's just kill everybody because they're such uptight morons. Like, I don't know, like that whole thing. I was like, well, their society didn't seem inherently evil. It seemed like there were things bad about it. But then to have the daughter be so like, yeah, let's kill my dad. Like, I was just like, man,
well,
all of that was hard for me to cheer for. So,
well, yeah, I mean, let me just start by just explaining. So they go down to this place called Down Under, or it's one of the Down Unders, I think, which is, this one is called Topeka. And yeah, it's this sort of like stereotypical middle-class suburb that's very conformist and conservative and everything. And Vic just hates it. He can't wait to get out. And it turns out that this has all been a setup, that Quilla June has been sent to the surface by the elders of the city to lure him down because they need him for breeding purposes. So the way he tells it, this story is told from Vic's point of view, but the way he tells it is that the men of Topeka, of this underground city, are so kind of weak and emasculated that they can only have female children, and so they need him, Vic, to be a real man and come in and father some male children. So this is obviously not scientifically plausible. So I think that, you can either read this as sort of like a very absurd satire, like a very absurd satirical story. I think the way I prefer to read it is that Vic is an unreliable narrator, and, he's just telling this story with a level of kind of braggadocio and, macho-ness that causes him to interpret the events this way or want to tell them this way. Or maybe somehow this is how he understood what was going on, or, maybe the elders potentially told him some self-serving, some self-serving deception to get his cooperation, to try to get his cooperation.
Right.
Didn't end up working.
Right.
I mean, I think that, that kind of works for me as being in the voice of the character. I mean, I think that if you wanted to make it more plausible, you could maybe throw in some hints that actually they need him for breeding purposes because, they're trying to prevent inbreeding, or potentially because, their population has just been bred in such a way that they're kind of cowardly or just lacking the aggression that they would need to really survive in this world, and they need to get some more aggressive genes into their population. And so this is something that they do. This is sort of a common practice they have, is to try to get the potentially bigger, stronger, more aggressive people from the surface to interbreed with them. So that's what's going on in the Topeka. And then what happens at the end of the story is that Vic plots his escape and kills a bunch of people, and Quilla June agrees to go with him, and they return to the surface to find that Blood, who had to be left on the surface, he couldn't go down to the city. He's dying of his injuries and is starving to death and needs food instantly or he will die. And Vic ends up killing Quilla June and feeding her to Blood. So again, very, very, very dark ending to the story, but I think this is one of Ellison's best endings. I mean, and just in terms of being well plotted. I mean, we'll get to this, but a lot of his stories have very weak endings. And this one I think is just a slam bang ending where it all kind of fits together.
I agree with that. I mean, you would think that after everything I said, I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, it's great that he killed Quilla June and fed her to his dog. But that's not the way I mean it. I think you probably know the way I mean it. The way I mean it is, it's such a cool thing to start. The character arc is so amazing. Like, you start with this guy who's this horrible, reprehensible person, and then he starts getting interested in this woman. He starts going, oh, I always thought women were just something you abused, but I'm sort of curious to know about her as a person. And she leaves and he follows her down the drop shaft down to Topeka, and then they're trying to domesticate him. And it's clear the entire time he's like, I will not be domesticated. I'm just going to bide my time. And then he kills a bunch of people and heads back up, and he is really attached to her. And then he's faced with this choice. Do I save my best friend forever, this dog, or do I go with this new and exciting relationship I've formed with this woman? And then he realizes that he has to choose one or the other. Not only one or the other, but if he chooses one or the other, he's going to, either the dog or the woman is going to die, and it's his choice. And he has to make this really brutal choice. So I do think that is a fantastic character arc. Is that mostly why it's one of your favorites?
Okay, well, so I think the reason, so you're saying, that the story is really dark. And I guess, have you seen the movie? Did you get a chance to watch it? No,
I didn't. I'm sorry. I didn't get a chance to watch the movie.
Okay. Because the movie, it's pretty faithful to the story. I mean, they make some changes, some of which I think are actually really good. But they make one change that I think ruins the entire story. And that is that at the end, basically Vic feeds Quilla June to Blood, and then they kind of just laugh about it and go on their way.
Yeah, that's wrong. That's totally wrong.
And so it just makes a movie where just like everybody's a total asshole.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of like, well, what do I care? I mean, like you were kind of saying, right, like there's nothing to root for here. I mean, I don't think you necessarily need somebody to root for in a story, but it does help a lot of the time. And I find the movie doesn't work for that reason, because it's just like, well, why do I care about any of these assholes? I think that what makes the story work for me is that you might have to parse it carefully, but it's a love story, right? It's a story about love. And that's one of the big mistakes they make in the movie, is that there's this really critical scene that I think they completely leave out of the movie, where Quilla June, when she first meets Vic, she says, you probably, you're from this wasteland, you probably don't even know what love is. And it turns out throughout the story that Vic does know what love is, that he's this product of this incredibly fucked up, toxic, evil, fallen society. which has shaped him in all sorts of horrible, horrible ways, but that at his heart, he is capable of loving. And Quilla June is a mirror image of him, that she's grown up in the most kind of safe, privileged, coddled, no deprivation kind of upbringing that you could possibly have. But she's not capable of love, that she's, she only cares about herself, and she can never. And so she looks at Vic and thinks that, and sort of presumes that he can't understand love, but really she's the one who can't understand love and doesn't grant, any sort of understanding for how the environment that produced him, right? And so what makes the story emotionally resonant to me is that Vic does fall in love with Quilla June, right? That's stated explicitly in the story. I mean, there's a part where they're climbing up the ladder to escape from the underground city, and she says, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" And he says, I told her I did, not just because it was true, but because it helped her climb faster.
Yeah.
But so he does love her. And then the ending is that he doesn't kill her and is just sort of laughing about it or is cold about it. He's haunted, and that's why the ending has always stuck in my mind. Oh, I meant to write it down, but I didn't. But it says something like, for a long time after that, I couldn't get her voice out of my head asking me, do you know what love is? Sure, I know. A boy loves his dog. See, I'm getting emotional talking about it. I mean,
wow.
So this is the thing, that Vic is capable of love, and he's given this really genuinely difficult choice between a romantic love that he's never experienced before or his dog. And he has to make this difficult choice, and he does. But it's all about, everything. And he's had this, throughout the story, he's had this acrimonious relationship with Blood where they're always teasing each other and they're always fighting and they have a big falling out in the middle of the story. But in the end, Vic loves Blood, and it's his love for Blood that is the sort of heart of the story. So I can go on to talk about how I think that relates to Harlan Ellison, but
no,
am I doing a good job of explaining why the story resonates with me?
An incredible job. I like the story a lot more now. That most of that went right by me. I feel like an idiot, but I didn't get the whole thing about even though he was brought up in this horrible society, he's still capable of love. And even though she was brought up in an idyllic society, she's incapable of love. I didn't get that. I just was mystified when she's like, "Yeah, let's kill my dad." I was like, "What the hell? Where's that coming from?" And then she's like, "Let's kill my mom too." And he's like, "No, that's not necessary." And I was like, I don't understand why all of a sudden she's this crazy person. But I guess, and I was like, I don't see anything in her society to show me why she should feel that way. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a reason, right? She's just a person who's incapable of love. I get that now, and I didn't get it before. And now the way you frame that, I'm like, holy cow, that story is way better than I thought. So yeah, you did a great job of outlining why you like it so much.
Yeah. So, and let me talk about the changes they made to the movie that are actually good. I mean, they make it so they get rid of the only female children thing and make it so that they have some sort of metabolic problem because they've been underground too long, which I think is not as good as what I said earlier, but makes more sense. They have this really memorable scene where in the story it's just suggested that Vic is going to be having sex with all the women down in the city. And in the movie, they changed it so he's kind of hooked up to this machine, and they're kind of milking him for his sperm. And they have all these women in wedding dresses, 50 women, young women in wedding dresses, just coming in one at a time to have a wedding, because it's this conservative society, to have this wedding ceremony performed so that she can be inseminated without it being sinful, So that's really like visually, a lot of the stuff is really memorable in the movie of the suburban landscape. And then they completely change Quilla June's motivation. Because one thing that doesn't make a ton of sense in the story is that she's willing to kill her parents and leave with Vic to go, presumably spend the rest of her life eating rats and fending off, roving gangs of bandits and mutants and stuff like that. And so you can buy maybe that like him, she's so suffocated by this environment that she just has to get out no matter what. But it's a little hard to buy, and it also kind of undermines the theme. As I see it, that she only cares about herself and is only interested in her own well-being. And I think the screenwriter, saw the same issue. So he changed it so that she wants Vic to come. She wants power within this underground city, and they're not giving it to her. So she wants Vic to use his violent tendencies to put her in charge, and then together they can rule over this city, this idyllic society. And then they only have to flee when that doesn't work, and she's running for her life. So that makes a little bit more sense in the movie. So I think that's potentially a good change. But again, just that last line just ruins the whole movie.
Yeah, that's awful. Oh my gosh, it's crazy that the screenwriter didn't get the meaning of the story like you did. Like the screenwriter didn't say, "Oh, this is the point of the story." And instead said, "Let me just change the last line so it completely scuttles it." That's crazy.
Yeah. So let me just talk about Harlan Ellison. And again, as I said last time, I don't love psychoanalyzing authors, but I just can't help it in this instance because it just seems to me, I don't know, this is, again, I never really knew Harlan Ellison or anything. But just from reading all these stories and all the interviews and everything, and like we talked about with the story, The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World, I just have this powerful sense that Harlan Ellison saw himself as an uncivilized person who was at his heart loving, surrounded by people who were sort of civilized and phony and selfish and unconcerned about other people. And I think that consciously or not, that this story expresses his worldview, that being civilized is not the same thing as being loving, that you can be the most uncivilized person imaginable and still be a loving person, or you could be the most civilized person imaginable and still be uncaring and incapable of love. And so it's not just a good story, which I think it is, but it's also, I think, the most pure distillation of Harlan Ellison's view of the world and people. And so, yeah, so that's why I love the story. I think that, I've read a million post-apocalyptic stories. I think a lot of them I really liked. A lot of them kind of blend together and were sort of forgettable. But I think what makes this so powerful to me is how it is such a direct expression of Harlan Ellison's personality and worldview, and how the violent and unsparing aspects of the story are inextricably linked with the theme, and the theme wouldn't work in a more toned down, sort of domesticated kind of work of fiction.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great psychoanalysis if you were going to do one on Ellison, and I think he would probably have agreed with it. And you see it pop up, you see that theme pop up over and over again in these stories. Like I won't spend too much time jumping ahead here, but is it okay if I just mention something that you made me think of from a different...
Yeah, go for it.
So in The Man Who Rode Christopher Columbus Ashore, there's a part where he says he drove around someplace in North Carolina or something with the loudspeakers, suggesting to people that they give their Bibles a rest for the day and instead read An Ordinary Day with Peanuts by, was it Shirley Jackson?
Mm-hmm.
And which I went and then read, and I was like, oh, okay, I see. But anyway, the point
Well, I'm glad you read. I didn't get a chance to read it, so I'm glad you got a chance to read it.
Yeah, we can talk about. I won't talk about it now. We can talk about it later. But it's that theme that like these people say that they're civilized, but they're not. They're not living their faith, or they're not living these ideals that they claim. They're these horrible people, and here I am as this like gadfly to say like you're doing the wrong thing. Which there was this interview. I think when we started like in the first installment of the Harlan Ellison discussion that we've been having, I kind of said, I think of Harlan Ellison as this like scary person who was like a really good writer and just had this like bizarre personality. And over the course of these 3 installments, I've changed that a lot. I feel like now that he was a very good person who had very good friends and just was outraged at things that he saw as being wrong with society. And I really think that's him. I really think like what you said is him, but I think that fits with what I'm saying too, that he was just a very good person who was just so angry that there was so much injustice in the world. And so and I think I get that sense because from watching a lot of interviews, like almost, there's an interview with him and Robin Williams. There's an interview with him and this other talk show host, and several of the interviewers in the interviews that I watched said, I want to talk. We're going to talk with my very good friend Harlan Ellison, and some of them even were like, we've been friends for 25 years, and he's a great person. And he had, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he was married for over 10 years at the end of his life. Before that, I used to think he was just this guy who just went from like relationship to relationship and just was so abrasive that nothing ever stuck, and he probably didn't have any friends. And now I think now I realize that's not true. He had a lot of very close social ties, and he was a very loving person, a very caring person. He just was so angry about injustice and the wrong that he saw in the world. And he says that one of the interviews I watched, he talks about like people, I think it was him and Isaac Asimov and Gene Wolfe. And I think it was this interview that I heard him say this. If it wasn't this interview, it was a different one, but he definitely said this, where somebody asked him like, why do you want to show people all these horrifying things? This might have actually come from the Thames interview.
It was, yeah.
And he said his answer is, and you'll correct me my details here.
This is Thames, like Thames, the river in England. So.
Right. And so there's this British interviewer, and she says, I read some of your stories, and they were great. They were really well written, but I have to say they were just really brutal, and they made me shy away. And I don't understand why you want to show people that stuff. And his answer really clarified the question that I had reading this story, A Boy and His Dog, where he said, look, life is brutal. Whether you like it or not, people, I'm totally paraphrasing, but people do horrible, terrible things to each other. And I don't want to shy away from that. I want to hold a mirror up to people and say, this is what we are capable of. And this is the kind of thing that we're doing. And I don't want to say like, oh, and he shot so-and-so and it's no big deal. The guy fell down. He's like, I want to describe vividly how awful that is when someone gets shot. And I want to show like the violence to every degree I possibly can to show people. Because a lot of like there's movies where John Wayne will shoot 500 people and it'll just be like, hooray, it's so good. And he's like, that lies about what violence really is. And it teaches us that when we're kids, even that, hey, violence is fun and it's something you can do. And he said, that's a lie. And I want to show people what it really is so that they have the truth. And that's why he does it, to show like we need to be better and we need to realize that this stuff is wrong. And I went, when I heard him say that, I went, holy crap, this guy, I have way more respect for this guy as a person than I ever did before. I've always had a ton of respect for his work, but hearing that, I just had this massive amount of respect for him as a person.
I mean, in that same interview, he talks about growing up as the only Jewish kid in a Midwestern city,
right,
and being bullied just horrifically. And I there's this saying, hurt people. I think that, I get what you're saying, that Ellison, a lot of his anger was driven by, perceived injustice in the world and things like that. I think he also just acted out in unhealthy ways. So I don't want to just
aggrandize him too much. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't want to just minimize that, but I mean, I think he was a complicated person and was angry for both idealistic reasons and personal reasons, and probably just psychological reasons and so on.
Sure.
But yeah, I said I didn't want to psychoanalyze authors too much, and we're like 38 minutes in here, and we're only on the first story, so.
Sorry.
So I think we need to move on. But yeah, I mean, I think that people should definitely check out those interviews because Harlan Ellison does give great interviews in addition to writing great stories. And again, yeah, this is one of my favorite stories. I would give it an unreserved recommendation with the caveat, as Tom alluded to, that if you're at all squeamish or, don't like, horrific actions or themes, particularly performed by the main character, you might want to give this one a pass.
Well, I will also say that I am glad that I have watched Natural Born Killers. There's movies like that and book and stories like this. I'm never sad that I experienced them. I always think, well, that was valuable. But I always also think I will never go back there. And this story, I may go back there just because now I understand it in a different light. So I may go back and give it one more read, but probably not over and over again.
Mm-hmm. And I was just, I mean, like I said, I hadn't read this since I was a teenager, so I was a little apprehensive it would have lost its magic to me, and it didn't. I still find it totally mesmerizing. There's like some things now that kind of irk me, like the fact that a teenager in a post-apocalyptic wasteland just happens to be obsessed with the same black and white movies from the 1940s that Harlan Ellison is obsessed with. That kind of makes me roll my ass a little bit, but not in any way that makes me not love the story.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to story number 2 on our list. This is called The Region Between. So this came out of a experiment in Galaxy magazine in 1970, where an author named Keith Laumer wrote a opening scene to a story. And then the magazine had different authors continue the story from there. And Harlan Ellison was one of the authors that they got to continue the story. The opening little bit, it's about a guy who goes to a voluntary, it's like in the future, and he goes to a voluntary suicide center and, has himself put to sleep, basically. And then I think Harlan Ellison's version picks up with the next scene. This is a very long, complicated story. It's 80 pages long. But basically what happens in this universe is that there are these unseen alien beings that people call thieves, capital T, and they somehow are able to steal the souls from, this is like a galaxy civilization of all different aliens, but these thieves are able to steal souls. So every once in a while, someone will just kind of drop catatonic because their soul has been snatched away. And so there's this character called the Succubus, who's sort of like a black market dealer in souls, and so he gets souls from different places, and he's known for having like the highest quality, purest souls. And it turns out one of his sources is Earth, and so one of the souls he gets is from this character Bailey we saw in the opening, who went to the voluntary suicide center. And so he sells on these souls to people, to aliens who need them, and so Bailey finds himself inhabiting the bodies of different aliens who have had their souls replaced. And he's kind of inside their mind, able to talk to them and try to convince them to do things differently. And we find out Bailey was an extremely cantankerous person who lived in this sort of authoritarian, like therapeutic, like almost Brave New World kind of society that he didn't fit in. And that's why he went to the voluntary suicide center. So he goes through a couple iterations of inhabiting different alien beings, and then at the end, he's ruined the lives of these aliens he's inhabited, or ruined the plans of the aliens who bought his soul. And so the Succubus sort of recalls him and confronts him, at which point it turns out that Bailey is actually God and destroys the Succubus. I forget, there might be some other stuff. I'm a little hazy on the ending now. But that's basically the story. So Tom, what did you think of The Region Between?
Well, I'll tell you, but first I want to know what you thought of the ending to this story.
I'll put my cards on the table. I basically didn't like this story at all. Yeah. I found it really long and really boring.
Yeah, I figured you didn't. I was like, Dave just said he loved the ending to Boy and His Dog, and he said a lot of his stories I don't like the endings too, and I was like, I bet this one he didn't like the ending too.
Yeah, I mean, like, this kind of reminds me a little bit of the story on the downhill side that we reviewed earlier, where it's kind of this really complicated, made up, fantastical scaffold that doesn't really repay all the effort you put into sorting out what's going on.
Yeah.
And the ending, actually, there was this Harlan Ellison story I read. I think it was in Science Fiction Age. I wrote down the title. Where is it? It was called like The Sex Pits of Mars. It was something like that. But actually, it was written as like a parody of pulp, of like 30s pulp science fiction, where they would start out with these really lurid, sexualized images that would sell magazines when you painted them on the cover. And then there would be this weird turn in the story where it would become cosmic at the end, and the main character would meet God or become God or have godlike powers or become emperor of the universe or something like that. And it's written as a joke, and I thought it worked really well as a joke from what I remember anyway. This story is like the same thing, but played straight, and it just did not work for me at all, the ending.
Yeah, I figured. So I loved the cyberpunk part. I was blown away that this was from 1970. I was like, oh my!
Wait, remind me what the cyberpunk part was.
So there's a the whole first being that he inhabits is this. I can't remember the details, but it's this creature that is.
Well, it's like a pilot. It's like a fighter pilot in a squadron of.
Right, but it's guiding the whole squadron. It's guiding, there's like individual creatures, but this one creature is in charge of them through this mind link that, it's on page 107 is the, I wrote it down because I was so blown away by it, and I'm going to have to magnify it because my eyes are not as good as they once were, but as each wire hissed from its spool, this is 1970, and locked onto the skull contacts, Pink felt himself go a little more to integration with the craft. At last, the final wire tipped on icily, and so Pink was metal flesh, bulkhead skin, eye scanners, bone rivets, plastic cartilage, artery ventricle, capacitors, molecules, transistors, beastcraft, all of him as one, totality, metal man, furred vessel, essence of mechanism, soul of inanimate life in force drive, linkage of mind with power plant, Pink the ship, Sortie Craft 90 named Pink, and the others linked to him. And there's 70 of them, and they're all encased in gel and wired up each mind to a sortie craft. So they're all, it reminded me of the Matrix when he's in that like liquid at the beginning with all the wires all linked through him. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, wow, in 1970 for him to be writing about that, I mean, a long while, well, I mean, maybe it's a decade or so before William Gibson, but I was kind of like, wow, this is really cool. I thought the whole situation he set up there was really amazing. And
well,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, Ellison's a great stylist. And so, like many of his stories, if you just look at any individual page or if you pick out particular passages, they're really well done.
Right.
Really. It's just the plot. I just didn't like the plot.
I agree. And I didn't, I loved that whole sequence. I thought this is a really cool story about this. It wasn't just the page or the style of that one passage. It was that entire story of that being. I was like, this is really cool. I loved that. And then I liked the part with the cat stalker. I didn't love it. And then it started being like going into one person after another. And then it kind of trailed off and was like, and then he was God. And I was like, okay, so he couldn't figure out where he's going to go with this. And he was like, I know. It was kind of like the ending to How Interesting a Tiny Man. He's like, well, I could make him God at the end. That seems to be like a common, like, oh, I'll just go to that as like my generic ending. So yeah, I didn't love it either. It reminded me a little bit of Mind Swap from by Robert Sheckley, the novel where I don't know if you've read that one, but
No, I haven't.
It's one of his few novels, and it's not bad. It's not good, but it's funny, and the concept is cool. It's this guy who loses his body and then has to he tries to transfer from the way you travel in space is you transfer from one body to another because spaceships can't go fast enough. So his soul is in this other body, but then you realize that his body has died and now he has no body. So he has to go and like rent bodies all around the galaxy, and he goes from body to body to body. And it reminded me of this because his soul is being taken out of one body in one situation and put into another one over and over again.
Yeah. Well, let me say what this story should have been, in my opinion, is it should have been 20 pages long, and it should have been a humor piece. This whole idea of this guy, his soul bouncing around to different alien bodies and him like fighting with them and telling them not to do whatever their alien thing they're trying to do should be funny, but it's just played straight. I mean, there's like a couple parts where there's like weird interjections of humor, but this should just be a humor. It should be a Robert Shackley story. It should be a funny story. Right. All the stuff with like the succubus, like stealing, like selling souls and like he's a drug dealer and stuff. It should be funny. And instead it's like super pretentious. There's all this like typography, like weird typography that I just found really annoying. And
that was awful. Well, that was so 1960s, 70s, right? Late 60s, early 70s to be like, well, why do the words have to go right to left and top to bottom? Why can't we make them go around in a spiral?
Yeah, it's just so self-indulgent, and at the end, or toward the end anyway, there's a page where the words kind of go around in a spiral, and by that I had a huge headache after reading 80 pages of this story, and you have to like turn the book around.
I did not bother to read that. I was like, that spiral of words cannot be that important that if I skip that, I'm gonna, because I was like, there's no way I'm turning this. This book weighs like 40 pounds. I'm not gonna sit here and turn this thing around over and over again.
So basically I would not recommend this story to anyone. It was a total whiff as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I will say, we talked before about Ellison and how he, you said he just kind of is all passion and he doesn't bother to rewrite anything. And I agree. I think he probably should have gone back and rewritten some, but I also think that might have killed his passion for, I think I might have said this in the last installment where I think it's the same as the Coen brothers. Like, you can't have the Big Lebowski without the Hudsucker Proxy. They have to have the creative freedom to fail in order to create works of genius. I think that's the same with Ellison. I think he is so passionate and he has this fire, and that's where the brilliance comes from. But at the same time, he doesn't have any interest in going back and fixing things, and that's why you have brilliance merged with alternating with whiffs like this one.
Yeah. Well, no, the reason we're doing 3 episodes about Harlan Ellison is because he's brilliant. But if you can't get the brilliant ones without the failures, there are definitely some failures. I mean, there's just no getting around that.
Right.
All right, let's move on to our next story, Basilisk. So in this story, there's an American soldier in a Vietnamese prison camp during the Vietnam War, and he's being tortured horribly. And I guess according to the rules at the time, he's not supposed to divulge any military secrets, but he does because he's being tortured. And in the process of this, also he's somehow contacted by some sort of magical or extra dimensional basilisk monster that kind of inhabits his body, and then it sort of shoots out fire or something and kills all of his captors. And so he's rescued and brought back to the United States. But everybody in his small Midwestern town knows that he divulged military secrets, and so he's just absolutely treated horribly by everybody, and his family doesn't want anything to do with him, and there's bullies come to his house to try to beat him up and all this kind of stuff. I guess that's basically the setup. So Tom, what did you think of Basilisk?
I thought this was a good story. I thought the core idea was really cool. I thought it was very raw and visceral. I didn't think it was a great story, and I am going to go out on a limb here and say I'm not as sure that you don't like the ending to this one as the region between, but I'm going to guess that you probably didn't like the ending to this one either.
I thought the ending was okay. I mean, yeah. So basically, what happens in the story is that after being mistreated by everybody, the main character climbs up on. They have this sort of like military monument or something in the town square, and he climbs up onto the top of it and uses his growing magical powers to kind of like mentally or like telepathically dominate everybody in the town and make them like experience the pain he was subjected to in the war and beg his forgiveness or something. And then at the end, then there's this sort of like tag where we find out this whole thing was engineered by, I understand, Mars, the god of war.
Yeah.
I thought it was okay. It was like a 5 out of 10 ending to me. I thought the story was pretty strong overall.
Yeah.
Just marred by a, so-so ending, but I wasn't sorry I read it.
Yeah, no, it was really, really well written, and I loved the core idea that this guy. I love that like this guy is like this Vietnam vet he's a POW, but then he gets this like dragon breath power that he doesn't understand or know how to use. I thought that would have been a really cool starting point for a novel if that was like in the hands of Stephen King or a writer like that, where you could take it. Kind of reminded me a little bit of Firestarter, like this person who's helpless, but they get this superpower that they don't really know how to use, and they at first it's just like wild, like a loose cannon, like destroying everything, and then they kind of start to get control of it. I thought that, the ending with the God of War, I was like, where'd that come out of? Like a Shaggy Dog thing or something.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, again, with on the downhill side, where it's like, what do unicorns and ghosts have to do with gem monsters? Like, whatever. It's like, yeah, it's like, what does Basilisk have to do with Mars? I mean, maybe, I don't know. Maybe there's some mythical connection between Mars and Basilisk or something. I don't know. But it seemed kind of random to me. But it's funny you mention fire. I was thinking this reminds me a lot of Carrie, that it's like this person who's just mistreated by their community and then gains this supernatural power to enact their revenge on the whole community,
Yeah. Very similar.
But yeah, like I would say good story, not amazing. Like you said, not amazing. But worth a read. The part where he goes back to his parents' house and it's abandoned and the bullies are looking for him to beat him up, that part really sticks out in my mind as being really engaging, and where he's climbing down the outside of the house and stuff. If all the details were so so specific, it made me wonder if Ellison was describing his actual childhood home or something. It just felt very, very believable to me.
Yeah, and I like that he took it out of a cultural moment too, where the Vietnam vets were coming home, and when the World War II vets came home, everybody was cheering them and giving them parades, and when the Vietnam vets came home, everybody was spitting on them and calling them baby killers and murderers. And not everybody, but that was generally happening, and that was a horrible thing for them. That messed them up almost more than what they experienced, because those people who were doing that didn't understand. These people didn't do this stuff on purpose, and they did do it on purpose, but they were put into that. They were kind of shoved into that situation where they had to make these horrible choices, and then they came home and suffered through it. And Ellison, being an activist, was definitely tied into that whole thing. And I think that's cool that he took that cultural moment and turned that into this story. I thought that was kind of nifty.
Yeah, I did like that he's writing, as you were talking about earlier, from this place of, of outrage about injustice in the world. I mean, that I did like that aspect of the story.
Cool.
Okay, let's move. Let me take a deep breath before I read the title of this story. Our next story, it's called Adrift, just off the Islets of Langerhans, latitude 38 degrees, 54 minutes north, longitude 77 degrees, 0 minutes, 13 seconds west. And I had tried to read this as a kid, I remember. I always found the title kind of intriguing, but I remember just kind of losing interest or not being able to get into it after a couple pages or something. So I was curious to come back to this and see if how I reacted to it as an adult or a much more experienced reader. Okay, this is an extremely strange story, but I will do my best to give a coherent synopsis. So basically, the main character is a werewolf, and he wants to die because he doesn't want to be a werewolf anymore. But because he's a werewolf, he's basically immortal, And it was a little confusing to me, but killing himself with a silver bullet would kill his body, but maybe not his spirit or something. But for some reason, in order to actually die, he needs to locate his soul. But he doesn't know where it is. So he's able to get in touch with some time travelers who are able to give him the location of his soul, which is these latitude, longitude coordinates I just mentioned. And so once he has those coordinates, he gets in touch with his old friend, Frankenstein's monster, who is now a scientist, in order to build some sort of contraption that's going to help him find his soul. And they then create like a miniature version of him, at which point the story switches to the point of view of the miniature version of him, who goes inside his body through his belly button. But then it turns out that inside his body is this sort of like surreal landscape where there's like skies and mountains and weather and stuff like that. And he does eventually locate his soul, which turns out to be like a Howdy Doody pin. And then there's also something about like this woman who's like, there's like a bunch of women who are all somehow the same woman. And then he kind of like falls in love with her and like decides he doesn't want to die anymore.
Yeah.
Right? That's more or less what happens in the story.
Hearing you, I was not laughing as I was reading this story, but hearing you describe it accurately is cracking me up. And I cannot believe the story is not humor. I mean, maybe it is, and I missed it, but it didn't seem like humor. It's like an acid trip. I feel like what year was this one written?
I don't have the dates written down, the years written down.
Because I feel like it's crazy that this book is all of his award-winning stories. So every time you read a story, like you're starting out thinking this one won an award, and then you start reading it and you go. You get an appreciation for the idea that awards come from people who are part of their time. So for some reason,
sorry, I just looked it up. This is 74. This was published, Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction.
Yeah, that doesn't shock me. I was thinking it had to be somewhere in the late 60s, early 70s, because everybody probably there were a lot of people doing a lot of acid, and they probably read that and were like, wow, this totally will blow your mind. There's so many like crazy ideas in here. And maybe that's why it won an award. I don't know that, but maybe there's a different reason. But I
have to think people who went to science fiction conventions just found Harlan Ellison really entertaining.
Right.
And
he was a rock star.
It was more about his, following than necessarily the specifics of some of these particular stories. I have to assume.
Well, good point. My notes from before hearing you describe all that, when I started cracking up, were great characterization, but it seemed to scatter near the end. I really liked the Lon Chaney was stillborn story, and I thought the character was very powerful.
Let me just say that's from an introduction. The Lon Chaney that's from the introduction to the story.
Oh, pardon me. Well, that was a note that I took down, and I didn't say where I got it from, but I found that I was.
Oh, sorry. Let me just explain. So the main character, the werewolf, is the character from a famous black and white werewolf movie called The Wolf Man, starring the actor is Lon Chaney, and the character's name is Larry Talbot or something like that. Talbot.
Larry Talbot.
Talbot. And so he's literally that character from the movie. And Harlan Ellison has an introduction where he waxes eloquent about how this is the most important werewolf story ever told and has completely changed the culture for all the time and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I was struck by the thought that when you have somebody who is just a force of nature like Ellison, who can just sit down and start banging out a story, I think it helps a lot if they have a strong character handed to them. Like he probably did not, I feel like he didn't spend a ton of time doing world building. Now I could probably 700 of your listeners or 7,000 of your listeners could probably be like, whoa, what about this story and that story? But I feel like he didn't do a lot of rewriting, and I feel like he probably didn't do a whole ton of, on every story, a whole ton of characterization and a whole ton of world building. I know there are a lot of exceptions to that, but I feel like a lot of times he just wanted to sit down and blaze his passion onto the page. So for him to be able to just pick up this ready-made character was a big help for him. And I think that's a really cool thing for writers to do, is say, I'm going to take this character from this other story and I'm going to start there. And I thought that character was so strong because of that. He just felt really strong to me. But it's not my favorite Larry Talbot story. My favorite Larry Talbot story is Only the End of the World Again by Neil Gaiman, whose name I have finally learned to pronounce. But that he does the same thing in that, and it's crazy how it's similar. Like, I was reading it going, oh, this is reading a little bit like Zelazny at the start here. It's reading a little bit like the Neil Gaiman story, and I think it's because of he lifted that character that Neil Gaiman lifted and used Zelazny's voice on. It felt the same to me. And I really enjoyed that part of it toward the beginning. Then as all the crazy details started coming in one after the other, I was like, it just seems kind of like he was tossing in more and more stuff because he didn't know where to go.
Yeah. Well, I'll divide this story into 3 chunks, right? 3/3. And the first third, I completely understood why I didn't get into this as a kid. The first third of this almost reads as if Harlan Ellison was given a writing assignment, and the writing assignment was tell a story and withhold as much critical information from the reader for as long as you possibly can. It's so hard to sort out what's going on, and like just the fact that Larry Talbot wants his soul is withheld from you for about 10 pages, and then there's about 10 pages where the werewolf and Frankenstein's monster are doing something, but you're not told what it is. So it's like really, you have to have a lot of patience with this story. Somewhere in the middle, in the second third, where they're working on their secret project, I thought this story was awesome. Huh. I was like, okay, now I sort of understand what's going on. And like all the details about the science seemed really well done. He's putting together sort of a like particle accelerator kind of contraption, and he must have Ellison must have taken the description from some actual piece of equipment, or it just like it felt really, really real. I was really, really into the story, and then I was like, oh, they should have included this in greatest hits. Like, it was a little hard to get into, but now I'm really loving this. But then you get to and I thought it was cool. Like, okay, this is funny that there's the werewolf and Frankenstein's monster, and it's like Ellison obviously loves these characters and is, doing something kind of interesting and unique with them. Then you get to the part where he goes inside his own body and it's all surreal. And it's kind of like, okay, this is getting a little too weird for me. Like, I'm not loving this part quite as much.
Right.
And then I thought the ending was a total train wreck, like a total catastrophe. Like, I don't know what was going on with Nadia. I didn't care. It seemed to come pretty much out of nowhere. It didn't make sense at all. So yeah, it's again an Ellison story where it's sort of undermined by an ending that was obviously not planned from the beginning.
Yeah, I agree about the third section. I would flip-flop the other sections just because I admired his use of the character so much in section 1, and then in section 2 I wasn't as excited, but and then section 3 I agree with you. I was just like, no, this isn't any good. But it's funny when you describe all the elements like that of the story, it makes me think of that movie Van Helsing, which I know is supposed to be a terrible movie, but I absolutely love that movie. I watch that like once a year, and I think it's so fun that it's like Dracula and the Wolfman and Frankenstein all kind of rolled together in one movie in this really goofy
I feel like this has been done a lot now, like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and all this kind of having all these like Victorian monsters together.
Right.
But I feel like at the time this was probably, I would guess, pretty novel to do something like this. I mean,
yeah.
So yeah, I think he was onto something here that other people have kind of taken and run with.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the ending. I literally have a note at the end. I about like, I hate this ending. It's ruined the whole story for me. Like, yeah. But I mean, I wouldn't discourage anyone from reading it if the description, if you like really kind of weird, trippy stuff. I mean, but yeah, I just need a better ending than this.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, do I have any other notes here? Oh, just the coordinates. I just looked up on Wikipedia. The coordinates he gives are just for a random location in Washington, D.C., next to Union Station. I don't know if that has any. I couldn't find if there's any significance to that. It might just be, he just put in some random coordinates.
Huh.
I'll also say, actually, the trippy part of this story, it reminded me a lot. I don't know why. It's just something about the mood and the tone and the subject matter to some extent reminds me of this novel Hollow by Owen Edgerton, who I interviewed a couple of years ago. It's about people who are obsessed with the Hollow Earth theory. And I thought that novel is basically what this story should have been. I mean, it's not like The Wolfman or anything like that, but just like that weird, like it's like that, the weird surreal feeling and, made up science and stuff. I thought that novel did it really, really well and was consistent throughout. And so if you read the story and you liked it, I would definitely recommend checking out that book.
Cool.
All right, so let's move on to Croatoan. I mentioned this is one of my other top 5 Harlan Ellison stories. Again, we're venturing into some very dark territory here. So the premise of this story is that there's a man and he has had flings with a whole string of women that have resulted in them getting pregnant. And he has these friends who perform illegal abortions. And then he flushes the fetus down the toilet. And so as the story opens, this has happened again. And he's flushed the latest fetus down the toilet. But the woman demands that he go into the sewers and retrieve it. This is obviously very like surreal nightmare dream logic kind of story. And so he's sort of pressured into doing this. And so he goes down into the sewers and encounters sort of a community of homeless people living in the sewers who are all sort of like creepy and weird. And one of them starts following him and he's afraid the person's going to attack him. But it turns out the person says something like, "You don't belong here. You make things worse here. We want you to leave." But he keeps going and he comes across a crocodile which has a leash. It's kind of dragging a leash, that's around its neck. And he starts following it and eventually makes his way down kind of into the deepest part of the sewers. It becomes this sort of like underworld. He finds a door that has the word Croatoan written in metal on it. Which I guess is an illusion I'll explain in just a second. And he eventually discovers this like colony of aborted fetuses who have grown into sort of like weird children with giant heads. And they ride around on crocodiles and they call him father. And that's the end of the story. Kind of gives me chills just summarizing it. So Tom, what did you think of this story?
I remembered you telling me that this was one of your favorites, and I read it, and again, you're probably going to have to educate me on why, because I read this story so I remember the alligators in the sewers myth from when I was a kid. It was popular when I was a kid. People would kind of reference it all the time. And then there was a movie that...
I guess let's just explain in case anyone doesn't know. Well, just explain about the alligators in the sewers. Yeah.
So when I was a kid, there was this idea that people in New York City would get all these like pets that they wouldn't really think through. Like, well, I got an baby alligator as a pet. Isn't it cute? I bought it. I don't know where people were buying these things, but I brought it home and then realized it was going to grow, and then I was like, I got to get rid of it. I don't want to kill it. I'll just flush it down down the toilet. I'll just flush it down the toilet, and then that'll take care of it. But there was this kind of urban legend that this was happening, and that there were actually full-grown alligators in the sewers in New York, and that would get referenced all the time. And then it got made into a movie called Alligator, I think, but it was about this giant, like 40-foot alligator that was somehow got big because it was living on other stuff that people were flushing down, including like some kind of chemical waste or something, which was another big thing back then when I was growing up, that there was companies just indiscriminately dumping dangerous stuff, and there was nuclear waste and all this stuff that people were worried about. So those kind of merged together into this idea. And then I think Harlan Ellison, when I read this story, I was thinking So Harlan Ellison took the alligators in the sewers thing and the Roe v. Wade thing and kind of merged them. And I get what he did, but I read it and just kind of went, huh, okay. And it didn't affect me emotionally. So clearly I missed something. So I'm waiting for you to explain so I can.
I don't know if you missed anything necessarily. I mean, like, well, let me just explain the Croatoan thing first. So if you don't know, in the early days of Europeans building colonies in North America, one of the colonies was the colony of Roanoke in Virginia. And, some of the people stayed in the colony and some of them went back to England, I think. And then when the people in England came back a few years later, the people they had left behind at this colony in Virginia had vanished. And the only clue as to what might have happened to them was they had carved the word Croatoan on like a fence post or something. This is related in the story. And so it's just been this enduring mystery, what happened to the lost colony at Roanoke and what does Croatoan mean? And so it's just sort of resonant of people who have vanished and mysteries that will never be solved. So yeah, I read this as a teenager. It made a huge impression on me. I don't know that I have any big explanation for the story or anything. I mean, I just think it's like a nightmare. It's like a really, really vivid nightmare. And it's just unlike anything I've ever read, I mean, maybe sort of Clive Barker or something. But I just feel like, in order to write this story, you basically have to possess 3 attributes. You have to have a wild, sick imagination to dream up this scenario in the first place. You have to be brave and or disagreeable enough to write it and publish it, knowing what sort of reaction you're bound to get. And you have to have the talent to make it a work of art and not just a provocation, just not sort of not just trolling, not just a provocation for its own sake, but something that, that becomes art. I guess it's sort of like the same thing with A Boy and His Dog a little bit, is that I think I like the story because it's edgy and dark and unique, but also because I don't get the sense that it's just Ellison trying to push people's buttons. I mean, I'm sure there's some of that, but it's not just a shallow button pushing exercise in being provocative and edgy. Like, I really get the feeling from reading this story that Ellison is expressing something he really, really feels very profoundly. I just feel like that comes through in the story.
Well, you sent me a thing from Perplexity where you asked where did his stories come from, and there was an answer about this one that does allude to that, wasn't there?
Yeah. So I mean, Ellison, I remember in his introduction he talked about this, but basically, what Perplexity said anyway, I assume this is accurate, is that he had been having an affair with a woman, and she told him that she had had an abortion. Like at the point at which it was too late for him to have any say about it, and it really sort of haunted him. And he had a vasectomy 2 weeks after writing this story, so that would never happen again. And he says, there's a note where he says, "I'm not against abortion, but I'm against waste," I think is. And I remember that line, has stuck with me for 30 plus years, whatever. So yeah, I guess that's, I don't know who else would write a story about fetuses growing in the sewers, crocodiles, Croatoan, and have it actually be good. Like, who else do that? I mean,
that's true. And he mentions in there that the idea that he says there's this idea, I think this is from the story and not from an introduction. He says there's this idea that the colonists relocated to the island of Croatoan, and that's why they left that there. But then there's no evidence to show that they were. But there is, funnily enough, there was in the past like few months, they discovered some evidence of advanced metallurgy on that island in like the sand. They found like smelted copper, like drippings of metal from like a forge, and they in the sand where you would like set something up and be smelting, and they actually think now that the colony just went there, and they left that word there as a sign that, hey, we're taking off, we're going to that colony. I mean, we're going to that island.
I just looked into it a little bit. I mean, like, I guess, one of the first things was that there was apparently a tribe nearby that was named the Croatoan or Croatoan tribe or something. So they thought, oh, they must have just gone there, but then there was they just couldn't find them. They
Right.
seemed to have just vanished.
Right.
So then it's like, well, did they mean something else? Like what happened to them? So it is just has been this enduring mystery. I mean, I guess maybe it was solved in the last couple of months, which kind of messes up this story. But but no, I don't know. I and this isn't a story where I can really, I don't know. I can't like justify or like, it's just, it just gives me such a feeling to read it, and it just feels so, so different and sincere.
That's valid
to me.
That's valid. That's a good reason to like a story, I feel like.
But if you just say like, oh, I read it and it was just weird and made no sense and like whatever, I mean, I can't really argue that you're wrong.
Okay.
But it just really hits me in a particular way.
Okay. That's fair.
Let's see. Do I have anything else about Croatoan? No, I think that's it. All right. So let's move on to our next story. Count the clock that tells the time. Okay, so in this story, there's a guy who's just sort of a really passive person and just kind of drifts through life, going to work and otherwise doesn't really do much. And he's always sort of dreamed, like the one thing he's ever thought about actually getting out and doing was traveling to Scotland. And so finally he decides, I'm going to actually do something with my life. I'm going to go to Scotland. And so he goes to Scotland and he's sitting on a hill watching the most beautiful view in Scotland. And is just filled with this feeling of emptiness because he still feels like he hasn't really done anything with his life. And at that moment, he sort of slips through into this like limbo where people who waste their lives go. And it's kind of this endless, misty plain where you can't see too far ahead of you. And somehow like historical events kind of like rush past as wind or something. And every once in a while you encounter somebody else who got sucked into this limbo. But if you lose sight of them, you'll never encounter them again. So Tom, what'd you think of Count the Clock That Tells the Time?
Well, certain ways that you described it makes me think you didn't love it. But I really, I really liked this story. I thought this was a beautiful depiction of depression. I thought it was... It also made me wonder if Ellison ever sued the BBD&O or Ogilvy or whoever made the Coca-Cola commercial from the 1980s or 1990s, where these police show up at this kid's door and say, "We're taking your youth because you're not using it." And it makes me think, like, if Ellison saw that, he'd be like, spit his Coke out as he's drinking it. That's it. File a lawsuit. Call his lawyer. But I thought it was really cool. I thought it was a really cool concept that if you don't use your life, then if you waste your life, then you're going to be punished somehow. And the way that you would be punished is you would be sent to this purgatory place with other people, peopled by other people who've also wasted their lives. And then the real kicker for me was that he decides, like, well, there's other people here. Maybe we'll be interesting now. And so they try to have this relationship together. And then it becomes clear that because they're both so depressed and uninteresting and uninterested, that they can't really have a relationship. They kind of start having one, but then because it's kind of too late, they just fade out of existence. And so and I'm not sure if that's right, that they faded out of existence.
No, I don't. That's not how I thought it had a happy ending.
I thought it was too late. I thought when they got to the end, it was too late for them and they couldn't really do anything about it.
I thought they escaped from the limbo.
Whoa. All right. Well, I probably read it wrong. I'm going to go with you. But when I read, I don't know. Well, my assessment of it anyway was that it was a good metaphor for depression of like, if you're in that zone where you're kind of, you think everything is no good, then, and I think Ellison's introduction, which I don't know if it was from this book or from the online version of it that I read, because of my eyes, because I can make the print bigger. But I think wherever I read it, his introduction, he was saying, when I wrote this story, I started it as a love story because I was just starting this love affair with this person who he met and very quickly married and very quickly divorced. And he said, I started it as a love story about this person, and then it turned into something else because it was clear to me that the love affair wasn't going to work out. Our relationship wasn't going to work out. And that's why I was, doubly sure that it ends up with, I think we should go look at the ending because I feel like you're probably right. But anyway, I took it as this is a story about if you're in a place where you're not really loving your life and nothing is grabbing your interest, and you think maybe I'll move to Scotland, and then you move to Scotland and you're like, this is no good either. This was a mistake. I moved to Scotland thinking this was going to fix my life, and it didn't. And then you think maybe I'll have a relationship with someone, and then you start having a relationship and you think, no, this isn't working either. And especially if you have a relationship with someone who, like you, is having a hard time figuring their life out as well, it's not going to like fix anything. You kind of have to be a whole person before you can move forward into having a relationship with someone else. And if you're depressed, that's not going to happen. And I felt like this story was just a great emotional depiction of that situation. Now, I might be wrong because I might have misread the ending.
Well, I mean, you have the book there, right? You want to just...
Yeah, I have. Why don't you talk while I'm looking, because I don't want to make anybody wait.
Well, it's interesting that you detected my lack of enthusiasm from the synopsis I gave, because I hadn't even gotten to the stuff I disliked yet. I mean, everything I described I thought was pretty cool. The guy, who goes to Scotland and then vanishes into the limbo because he's just sort of a sort of forgettable person. And then, I mean, all that stuff I thought I was totally on board for all that stuff. And then the one thing I really was baffled by is that all the historical events that are always blowing past them in this limbo are all historical events of huge importance. And I didn't really get that. Like, I thought it would have been events that weren't important, because I thought this is the place where the unimportant things go. I mean, there's something about like balancing the conservation of energy kind of thing. I don't know. So maybe that explains it, but I was puzzled by that. And then, the various people he meets, he meets this woman who's been there a while, and she kind of gives him a little, lesson on what this place is about. And then he meets someone who's been there much longer and is sort of this colorful character who, has a whole like philosophy about it. I forget if he's an identifiable historical figure. It's been a little while now since I read the story. But all that stuff I thought was pretty cool. I was on board. And then he meets this woman who also is a sort of another like nobody, forgettable kind of person like he is. And as I remember the story, as I read the story, they kind of like fall in love and make each other start to live and escape from the limbo, which I just thought was like super schmaltzy and sentimental and totally unpersuasive. Both of the characters were not interesting to me at all. I mean, and this is sort of the hazard of having two characters who are established as being such forgettable people that they've vanished from existence. Like, do I really want to read a story about both of them together? I mean, I think it could work. But I think the problem is, I think once again, Ellison painted himself into a corner where he wasn't thinking ahead, and he ends up with these two characters in this like limbo where they can't really do anything. There's nothing really for them to do. Yeah. He's already established all that. And rather than being like, oh shit, I need to like go back and rework this somehow, he's just like, let me just end it anyway. This is my very strong, sorry for fans of the story, but this is just my very strong feeling about what happened.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
you remind me, I tried to write a story many times over the years called Superhero in the Off Season about this. I used to work as a valet at a ski hotel and a bellhop. And it was the coolest job. It was still one of my favorite jobs I've ever had because you're running around and there's 4 other guys and you're carrying stuff and it's physical and it's exciting and it's fast paced and you're putting cash in your pocket. I absolutely loved everything about it. And then March would hit and the snow would melt and you'd be stuck there for a month before whitewater season started and you went to guide on rivers and you'd stand there for an 8-hour shift felt like 30 days. I'd take a walk around the hotel and I'd get back and I'd look at my watch and like 3 minutes had gone by and I'd be like, oh my gosh, when's this going to end? So I had this idea for a story called Superhero in the Off Season about a superhero who's like got all these amazing powers, but like all the villains are in jail and he's waiting for one of them to break out. And he's just like, I guess I'll go make coffee again. But I realized after trying, I still haven't totally given up, but I just like could never write it because it was so boring. And this story made me think of it, but I disagree with you for a couple of reasons. One, I think, yes, these people are absolutely uninteresting, but I think that's the point. And I think what you're supposed to do here is what I mentioned, I think, in the last episode where we talked, I mentioned how Edgar Allan Poe said, a story should create a single effect. And I think this story does. And I think it gets across a really powerful message about depression, and which I already explained. And the second reason I disagree with you is because although I have learned never disagree with Dave on the details because you usually do your research. And after every episode, after every time I on the show, I go and look things up and I go, oh, I was wrong about that. But not this time because I just read the end and maybe I'm still misreading it. But so it's talking about how they're fading. They're starting to fade out of existence on the last page. And they thought they were too late. It comes too late. Invisible motes of themselves were drawn off and were sent away from that gray place, were sent where they needed to maintain balance, one on one, separated on the wind and blown to the farthest corners of the tapestry that was time and space and could never be recalled and could never be rejoined. And I won't read the rest, but it basically goes on and just says, they vanished out of existence and endlessly until finally at last, hopelessly and too late, 2 of their nameless order had found the way out. The way out was non-existence, was death. So it's not a happy ending. It's that they just dissolve and they're gone because they're too late to have, because they've waited so long, they're too late to have success at having something interesting happen to their lives.
Okay, well, I confess I had totally lost interest in the story by that point, so maybe I wasn't, parsing it as closely as I possibly could have.
That's fair.
I mean, well, so just to give you an example of what I mean. So this is the list of sins that of being so boring that got this woman banished to this limbo for total nobodies. Like, these are some of her crimes here. Reading every word in Time and Reader's Digest, learning 7 new words every day, listening to talk radio, calling Aunt Beatrice every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, talking brightly to the waitress in the orange and blue uniform at the chicken pie shop. This doesn't seem so bad to me. It sounds like kind of just normal stuff, right?
Well, I think that's his point.
Wait, let me just finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is like how they become real people again, or at least on your reading make moves in that direction. They began to use their time together, setting small goals for each day upon awakening. We will walk that far. We will play word games in which you have to begin the name of a female movie star from the last letter of a male movie star's name that I have to begin off the last letter of a female movie star. We will exchange shirt and blouse to see how it feels for a while. We will sing every camp song we can remember. They began to enjoy their time together. They began to live. I cannot for the life of me see any difference whatsoever between those 2 lists of things.
That's fair.
In fact, the prior list seems actually far superior to me.
Well, maybe not. I mean, you're right. The first list is definitely, I think it's Ellison saying, like, these people are living paint by numbers lives. They're saying, oh, I guess I should learn 7 new words a day because it says so in Readers. There used to be a column called learn 7 new words a day or something like that. And I think I used to read Reader's Digest. So, and he mentions that several times in some of these stories about how he hates people who read Reader's Digest. And I'm like, well, I was a little kid and it was all we had in the house that was new. So I would read it. But no, I think he's kind of criticizing the paint by numbers lifestyle that people just think, oh, I should do these things. And he has some great details early in the story where it's like, he spent his days drinking water, then drinking apple juice, then drinking water again. And he just describes this like pointlessness of everyday life that it can feel very pointless. And you feel that if you are in a depressed place. And then, yeah, that's a very valid criticism that then they start doing the same stuff. But I think the difference is that they're doing it, they're interacting with each other, and they're starting to like make an effort. And then, but it's too late, and they're just too boring people, and they're still doing boring stuff, and they just fade out. They just like, I think if they really would have started doing super interesting stuff, they might have been able to break out of it. Maybe then it would have been a better story. But I think he was probably in a place of depression when he wrote this over his, the ending of his marriage, and I think he started out writing it where he didn't say he wrote it after the marriage ended. I think he said he wrote it when he started realizing like already at the beginning it's not going to work. And I thought it was this cool thing, but it's not. So he was starting to write a story about 2 people who were boring and found each other, and it became a happy ending. And then he ended up realizing like, no, that's not the way this works. And I like that. I don't know. I think it's a good single effect story of here's what it feels like to be depressed, have nothing you care about in your life, and then meet somebody else who's the same, and you think you're going to save each other, and then it's gone. So that's my read of it. Yeah.
Okay. No, I mean, I'll totally buy this as that if you have experienced depression, that this resonates with that experience. I just think, I don't know. I thought it was a good first half of the story. It needed a much better second half, in my opinion. And if the point at the end is that it's, they made all this effort and it's too late, they faded out of existence anyway, I feel like we could have maybe hit that note a little harder because, it just didn't really land for me.
Makes sense.
But yeah, I guess we're gonna just agree to disagree on this story, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to our next story. It's called "With Virgil Oddum at the East Pole." Okay, so how this story came about is pretty interesting. So Harlan Ellison organized a series of lectures at UCLA in 1975, where he got a bunch of hard science fiction authors together. And the idea was that they were going to brainstorm and come up with a planet and its ecology and aliens and stuff like that. And then they were all going to write stories set on that planet, and it was going to be an anthology. And so you had authors. So you had Hal Clement, famous hard science fiction author, came up with the astronomical details. And then Poul Anderson, Larry Niven, and Frederick Pohl came up with the geography, biology, and cultures. And the stories were all compiled in an anthology called Medea, Harlan's World, with a who's who of big-name science fiction authors, including Frank Herbert, Theodore Sturgeon, Robert Silverberg, etc. So that's all very interesting. And so this is Harlan Ellison's contribution to the book. So this is has much more of a flavor of hard science fiction than Ellison typically has, because he's drawing on the work of these other authors. They put together like a little pamphlet describing all the details of this world. And so the actual plot of this story is that there's a character and he's done something bad, something violent, I think. I don't think it's ever specified exactly what. And he's sort of exiled himself to this icy alien planet to kind of meditate or, reflect on the bad things that he's done. And it's sort of like a North Pole kind of feel to it. And there are these aliens, I forget, I think they're sort of blue and furry or something. And they have they're intelligent, but they don't have any art or language. They're telepathic. and he's sort of for years been trying to communicate with them, and with basically no success. And then another human comes to his camp basically, and is just a total dick to him, and keeps setting off into the ice for purposes unknown. So Tom, what'd you think of with Virgil Oddum at the East Pole?
This story was kind of cool. I didn't absolutely love it, but I enjoyed it. I thought it kind of reminded me in a good way of The Razor's Edge I think it's by William Somerset Maugham, the book about the guy who's like mystifying because there's something so unique about him. It reminded me a little bit of the movie Amadeus too, because it's from the point of view.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
the character who is wants to be talented, but is not, watching somebody else who is exceptionally talented and very frustrated by that, and to the point of trying to derail his efforts, but in space. And I think the story of how it came about is really cool to me. How, I said before how I think it's cool when somebody who's just a force of nature like Ellison gets a freebie on a character, just borrows a character from somewhere else because it helps them along. And I think the same thing here, where he was given a world with all the world building done, all the science fiction stuff laid out. Here's the ecology, here's the natives of the planet, and the flora and fauna, and how it looks and feels, and had all that handed to him is kind of cool. And then he just had to like let his raw power loose in that arena. It's kind of fun. But yeah, I thought the story was cool. I wasn't blown away by it. I thought it was the thing I liked best about it was the Razor's Edge type of thing, where he's just blown away by this work of art at the end. The rest of the story, I was like, that's kind of interesting, but the ending.
Let me just explain that. So toward the end of the story, the aliens start drawing little like sketches on the ground, and the main character is thrilled because he feels like he's finally, after all this time, he's finally gotten through to them and introduced them to the concept of art, and now he's going to be famous. But then he sets out. But then they lead him out into the ice, and it turns out that the other guy, this other visitor to his camp, has sculpted this like mountain-sized ice sculpture that's just the most amazing work of art that anyone's ever seen. And he's died just before finishing the last little part. And so these aliens, who have all become kind of like disciples of this other guy, ask our main character to finish it for him. And so he does, but he's sort of devastated that it wasn't him who taught them about art in the first place. And now he's sort of bitter that he doesn't get the credit. Everyone gives all the credit to this other guy, and not to him, even though he feels like he made a legitimate contribution. So yeah, I don't know. Actually, as I was reading this, I really liked it. It felt very, the world was very well realized. I was interested in what was going to happen. I thought the ending was interesting. There was a point at which I was sure that the main character was going to destroy the beautiful work of art out of jealousy, and I was, really feeling like, no, don't do that. Like the story got to me in that way. So as I was reading it and as I finished it, I thought I really liked it. But I don't know, it's been a week or so since I read it now, and it's kind of fading quickly. So I don't think this is going to be a story like A Boy and His Dog or Croatoan that I remember for the next 30 years,
right?
For whatever reason. So yeah, it's like I thought it was really well done, but in the end hasn't made a huge impression on my memory, I guess.
Yeah, I think again, Ellison's style is the hero in this story. It's so like when you see the work of art, the way he describes it, you feel like you're really seeing it. It's pretty amazing. But I do like the thing that I talked about, the Razor's Edge thing, where have you ever read that book?
No, I haven't.
So it's an okay book. It's very old. I think it's from like the 1920s or 30s, 40s. I don't remember exactly, but it's basically about this guy who knows this other guy, and the other guy finds enlightenment in the East, in like Eastern thought. And he finds it bit by bit. So the guy every time he sees him, the guy is less and less healthy, but more and more glowing with light from within. And so that reminded me a lot of Virgil Oddum, because that's what he does. He does, right? Every time you see him, he's happier and happier and more transported, but he's less and less healthy because he's making this work of art. And then you get to the end of The Razor's Edge, and you feel like you have caught a glimpse of enlightenment. And it's the same thing here. That's the thing I do like about the story, is you get to the end and you feel like you've caught a glimpse of what art really means. And so I like that part of it, but I agree with you that it's not going to be a story that I'm going to remember, 5 years from now or something, or think about.
Yeah, I guess I feel like with a lot of these stories that Ellison, or the ones that don't hit me as much, I guess, is that Ellison focuses a lot on describing physical things in a lot of detail.
Yeah.
Like the region between, he spends a lot of time with physical descriptions of these alien landscapes. And that's kind of the case with this one too. And in this one, the physical descriptions are really well done. But I feel like his facility with description is a bit of a double-edged sword, because I feel like sometimes he gets so carried away with his physical descriptions of things that the characters get shortchanged. And I feel like that maybe happens in this one too. I mean, we have both these characters who we know have done terrible things, but we never really find out exactly. And I just feel like, finding out what the histories of these characters are maybe would have made this story more memorable in the end.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, so let's move on to our next story. It's called Soft Monkey. This is not science fiction, or there's no speculative element. That's the only story in the book, I think, with no speculative element. It was, I think it won an award for, an Edgar Award, I think it's called, for Mystery Writers of America. But basically the premise is that there's a homeless woman, and she witnesses a murder, and then has the mobsters who committed this murder after her, because they're trying to eliminate her as a witness. And I think it's ambiguous for most of this story. She has like a doll and or baby, and it's at least somewhat ambiguous what's going on, but we eventually understand that she had a baby who died, and now thinks that the doll is the baby, and is sort of in a delusional state where she thinks that her baby is still alive. So Tom, what'd you think of Soft Monkey?
I thought it was a very powerful story. Unfortunately, I was waiting for the speculative element to come in. I was like, where's this going to come from the whole time? And that may have just distracted me some from it. But I thought it was, very bleak, very vivid, and what I wrote down as my impression was beautifully ugly. I think it shows you such ugliness that I was talking about earlier when I said Harlan Ellison described what he was trying to do as I'm going to describe the ugly stuff because I want to hold a mirror up to us and say, this is what we're capable of. Let's get away from it. And this story is so packed full of that. But it's not the same as A Boy and His Dog, where I'm thinking, why would you show me this? I don't want to see this. Maybe I had already seen that interview by then, so I was on board with what he was trying to do. But I think it was more that she was you really wanted to root for this character. I mean, she was such a broken person, and yet you could see how she was going to, how she had just dumpsters full of resourcefulness, to coin a phrase, at her disposal, where she could just do amazing. This poor old homeless, weak black woman could just come out with this amazing fight in her that was totally believable. And his description of action sequences is so vivid and so well done that I felt like I was watching this happen. I was riveted by this whole thing, really.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely didn't like this as much as you did then. I mean, for me, this was another one that started out really strong. I thought that the character of Annie was really well drawn, the homeless woman. It seemed very believable to me. And the the situation where she witnesses this murder and then she's on the run, definitely grabbed my attention. I guess I was kind of hoping for some sort of speculative element. And when she starts like killing the mobsters, I definitely wondered if there was something supernatural going on, because it, to me, felt sort of hard to believe. I mean, it sort of plays, I guess, with the idea you hear that when people have a rush of adrenaline and, their child is in danger, that they can throw over cars and stuff like that.
Well, he references that directly in the story, yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, I don't know. It was another one that, to me, sort of, as it went along, I kind of lost interest in it. Yeah, I think I just wanted a speculative element. And without one, it felt like, it was all right, but
I can see that.
Not one of my favorites.
I can see that. That's what I mentioned at the beginning. It was kind of distracting that I kept thinking, when's the speculative element going to come in? But I really thought what made it more believable that she was able to kill these mobsters is that they were very concerned with their appearance, and she could go to places that they couldn't go because of the horrible life that she had to, all the horror that she's had to face in her life. She can go places where they can't. She can, she can make herself look disgusting enough that all the normal people will move out of her way, like Moses parting the Red Sea, and then they close behind her, and then the mobsters in their finery can't get through. Or she can go to the bottom of a dumpster full of like rotting ooze happily, and they don't want to touch, they don't want to get, anything splattered on their cashmere suit. I just thought that made it more believable to me. The part where she grabs the guy and pulls him into the dumpster and kills, like that part, it was kind of like, okay, well, she must be wirier and tougher than she appears. But no, I thought it was believable, and I thought the characterization was absolutely amazing. The whole thing of like who she was, what she'd been through, and her delusion about the baby being alive was just really got me. So.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I'm glad you liked it. I mean, I don't personally recommend it, but, I'm glad one of us,
yeah,
like, thought it was cool.
Cool.
Okay, next story. The function of dream sleep. Okay, so let's see. So this one starts out, there's a guy, and he's grieving the loss. Like, a bunch of his friends have died recently, and he's very depressed. And he wakes up one time and just sees a mouth full of sharp teeth in the side of his body, and it closes, the moment that he opens his eyes and vanishes. But he's sure that he saw this mouth there. But of course, people don't believe him, and he is his ex-wife refers him to this like support group, and the leader of this group turns out to be a member of this group of people who live at this mansion in the Hollywood Hills, and they're all supernatural, and they have a supernatural ability to like absorb people's pain and suffering into themselves. And then the story goes from there. But so Tom, what did you think about? Oh, I guess in the title, The Function of Dream Sleep, there's sort of this theme running through the story of what is why do we dream? Like, what's the point of that? And different theories are raised, including the idea that it's just kind of like the analogy is made to cleaning out an office building at night. That when we dream, it's just like cleaning out stuff so that we can focus on what's important when we wake up.
Right, but then that turns out not to be true. According to the story, what the truth is that. Well,
I was going to save that for a little bit later, but just overall, did you like the story, or how did you feel about it?
I really liked the story. Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. I thought in the last episode we were talking about how science fiction or fantasy has to, if you have a speculative element, there has to be some grounding in something real to give it resonance. And this, in my view, this story does that very well. So.
Yeah, I thought this story was superlative until the very, very end. So once again, I felt like Harlan Ellison didn't quite nail the ending, but 90% of the story I was blown away by. I thought it was really, really good.
Yeah, the whole idea is that he has lost a lot of, and this is like autobiographical, but the main character has lost a lot of friends lately who have just died for different reasons, and he's having trouble letting go of them. And there's this mouth that he wakes up from a dream and sees this mouth open in the side of him with something cold coming out of it. And what it's doing, he finds out through the events in the story, is that it's letting their souls out of his body. That you have to do this when you have dream sleep. What actually, I'll let you were going to describe that.
No, I guess go ahead. But it's like a wind coming out of the mouth, out of his side, right?
Right, and that is the function of dream sleep, is that to get the horrible things that have gone into you, to get those back out of you, so that you don't bottle things up. And I suppose specifically to get their souls out of you, your friends' souls out of you, so they don't build up too much pressure inside you and cause all kinds of problems. And the main character can't do that correctly or something. But go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, or is it that like he's seeing the process? Like normally most people
don't see it.
I guess they don't experience enough grief for this to happen. And there's like, I think I actually I have the quote here somewhere. But yeah, it's like only the people who have suffered the most of the most, like have this, it's called the Thanatos mouth, like the death mouth, that have this phenomenon occur. And like they say only like one, actually it's right here. Somebody says to him, "You are a remarkable person. Not one living person in 1,000,000 has seen the Thanatos mouth. Not one in 100 million has felt the passage of the soul. Not one in the memory of the human race has been so tormented that he thought it was real and not a dream."
Yeah, so, I took that to mean that everybody has this Thanatos mouth, but people don't see it or feel it happening. And he's the one, he just happened to see it, and that caused some kind of problem. Like he interrupted it in the act of trying to do that for him, and now it's bottling up inside him.
Yeah, I think you're right. That I guess, yeah, everybody has this happen, but it's because of the intensity of his grief that it's like it can't help but be noticed. He can't help but notice it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which actually came from a real dream that, according to something I read on the internet, so it must be true. It came from a real dream that Ellison had. He woke up, he had this dream, and then he woke up from it and was like, whoa, I just imagined there was like a giant mouth with teeth in the side of me, like open with this wind coming out of it. What's that all about?
Yeah, so it was like a little bit of a question to me that this ordinary guy living in Hollywood and working at a normal, I forget, it's like a print shop or something, some sort of normal job, has experienced a torment that like nobody else in the history of humanity has ever felt. Right. Like not even people in war zones or like whatever, you know.
Right.
That seemed a little self-absorbed potentially to me on Harlan Ellison's part.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just a little bit of a hiccup for me in a story generally I really liked. I mean, the part that really blew me away was this scene where he goes to this mansion with these women who are like this circle of empaths, and you meet them and like one of them is badly burned and one of them is missing her legs and stuff like that. And you sort of, initially assume that these are just people who they've, been in accidents or whatever. But then you realize like, oh, these are the people who absorb other people's pain into them. And so this is like the scars that they've gotten from doing that.
Yeah.
And so they try to absorb his pain, and it just like kills half of them. And the woman who was badly burned has now been completely incinerated, and it's just like a pile of ash, and the ceiling is scorched. And it's really, really horrific and memorable. I was totally blown away by that whole sequence. But so then what happens is that, they're not able to help him. So he asks the leader, or the leader of the group, I guess, kind of lets slip that there's this other person he could potentially seek help from. But she's like, don't go to this guy, Labraz. She's like, don't go to him. He's bad news. He's like the worst thing ever. Don't go. And the main character kind of like browbeats her and forces her to give him the address and goes and seeks out this guy, Labraz. And that was all really cool. He shows up at the house and there's this sort of like really disfigured person answers the door and leads him into the house and introduces him to Labraz, who's this guy sitting in his library. And it's really intense and creepy. And I was loving absolutely everything up to that part. And then, I don't know, do you know where I'm going with my complaint about the ending, or did you like the ending, or what did you think about that part of the story?
I must not have loved the ending because I don't remember exactly how it resolved. I remember him going there, and then I remember it resolved, but I don't remember exactly what happened. So it must not have made a giant impression on me.
It's very forgettable, in my opinion, which is my issue with it. Yeah. So it turns out that this horribly disfigured person who opens the door is Labraz's wife, and she died. And he was so consumed with grief and couldn't let her go that he sort of like dragged her soul back from the afterlife. And it's come back in this, and that's why it's her form is so disfigured, because this is like just such an unnatural thing to have done. And there's kind of a striking description where one of her eyes is described as being kind of milky and filmed over. And then she has one eye that's just clear and blue and beautiful. And that's like the one part of her that hasn't been, disfigured by this process. So all that I thought was pretty cool. I mean, my big problem with the end of the story is that it just felt way too easy. So basically, after all this setup about how Labraz is so sinister and everything, in the story he just seems totally cool. He gives the narrator good advice and helps him come to terms with his grief, and then he like lives happily ever after. And it's like, to me, such a weird, easy, abrupt ending to what was otherwise just an absolute powerhouse, amazing story. So maybe I just misunderstood it, like I did with the other one we just talked about.
No, I don't think so.
Count the clock that tells the time.
I don't think so. I remembered all that about the wife, but I didn't remember how it resolved. And now that you say that, that's just a kind of like, okay, everything's fine. And why was I do remember them saying, no, you absolutely can't talk to Labraz. And he's like, I must talk to Labraz. You can't talk to, it was like went back and forth, back and forth.
No, that's the whole thing. Like if they hadn't had that part, it would still wouldn't have been great, but it would have been a little better. But it's just like, he like this Labraz guy was talked up so much. Yeah. And then he's just this chill guy. Like it was so weird.
Yeah, it would have been more resonant. Now this is probably off limits or out of bounds, but it would have been more resonant if it had been some big price he'd had to pay, like sort of like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where he'd had to like, you have to forget the person forever and you can't have the love that you had from them. And if you're willing to do that, you can get better, but otherwise you're going to have to suffer this. And he would have had this choice, something like that, where he would have had to pay some big price that was obviously too big to pay. And that's why the person said, don't go see Labraz. That would have made more sense.
Yeah, no, I actually really like that idea. Yeah, there's lots of things it could be, lots of like prices that he might have to pay or whatever. I like the idea of it, because this is what people say when you lose a loved one. You're like, this hurts so much, I can't stand it. And people will say, well, would you rather that you felt nothing, like the extent of your grief is matches the love you felt for this person. And if they were just to die and you felt no pain, would you even want that? And so that could be what he gets. It's like you have no pain. But then is that what you really want? Like, isn't the pain something that testifies to your love for the person that you've lost or something like that, but yeah, I mean, but this is, it's, to me, it's structured like a horror story. Like every, like cue reading it is that this is a horror story, and this situation is just going to get worse and worse and worse, and it's going to end with either the main character being, destroyed, or have some horrible fate inflicted on them at the end, or it might have a happy ending, but not without some huge cost or effort or something. And so it's just that missing cost or effort at the climax that just feels so strange to me in the context of this story that is so queued up to be a horror story.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record here with the the Harlan Ellison endings, but yeah, I just really wish, like, almost all these stories start out so good, and most of them continue so good, but then there was just whiff after whiff on the endings, in my opinion, in this batch of stories. So I hate to keep repeating myself, but yeah, this was another one that I loved. Like I said, I loved until like literally the last 3 pages. Then I was kind of like, oh, all right. All right. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah. Let's go on to, I'm curious to see what you think of the next 2.
Okay, so second to last, we've got The Man Who Rowed Christopher Columbus Ashore. This is another one as a kid, I think, that the title always sort of intrigued me, but I feel like I would start to read it and just kind of like, not get into it. So basically the premise is that, and you never know exactly what's the deal with this main character, but he seems to be some sort of, he works for some sort of reality manipulating organization. Potentially he's an angel working, for the hierarchy of heaven, or maybe it's like some sort of extra dimensional thing, like that movie, The Adjustment Bureau. It's not 100% clear. But anyway, you have this character who calls himself Levendus, and he seems to have been tasked with doing one good deed a day. And each day he does something, but the things that he does are decidedly mixed in terms of their impact. So sometimes he does something good, sometimes he does something bad, sometimes he does something just to sow chaos, it seems, or on a whim, or for his own amusement. So he kind of bounces around through time to different times and places, interacting, changing things, kind of on a whim again. So Tom, what'd you think of The Man Who Rowed Christopher Columbus Ashore?
I thought it was a cool story. I thought it was fun to read. I don't remember the ending, but so I can tell what maybe you're going to say about it. But I thought it's funny. I thought it's definitely, the story is a retelling of the story An Ordinary Day with Peanuts by Shirley Jackson, who also wrote The Lottery. And I decided, well, I'm going to go read that then. And I was doing this today, and I didn't have time to go find it and read it. So I found it on YouTube, and I listened to somebody read it. And the only place I could find it on YouTube was this lady who, she was clearly reading stories for a different purpose than to read the story to you. She was doing it in a very slow, sexy voice. And so I had to...
It's like an ASMR kind of?
Yeah, exactly. So I had to speed the story up double, and then it sounded kind of normal. But so that's how I experienced the Shirley Jackson story. But it's very similar. I mean, it's like Ellison just read her story and was like, oh, it's really cool. I'm going to redo that in my own world. And he doesn't even... There's a quote he puts either in the story or in the introduction where he says, you should create enigmas, not answers, or something like that. Create enigmas, not solve mysteries. And I think Shirley Jackson was doing that same thing. I thought, well, okay, here's the thing. Here's his twist on it, is that he decided to do this, like, well, it's not just going to be good deeds. It's going to be bad deeds too. And you're going to have to figure out, like, you're going to be left thinking, well, why does he do good and bad? I don't get it. And that's the enigma. But Shirley Jackson does that as well. So she doesn't do it at first. It's like the guy in the story is doing good deed, good deed, good deed, good deed all the way through. And then he gets to the end and his wife comes home and he says, how was your day? And she says, oh, it was fine. And she names all the bad deeds she's done. And he says, you must be tired of doing all these bad deeds. You want me to do those tomorrow? And she says, yeah, why don't we switch? And so that's the enigma of her story. But it's not that different from Ellison's enigma. It's just that Ellison said, I want to do this in my style, in my world, so I can do like all this other like fantastical stuff as well. But I still thought it was a really cool story. I thought a lot of the vignettes were really fun to read. I thought they all kind of hung together and I enjoyed it. I don't know that it added up to an enigma because it's pretty easy to answer the enigma. The enigma is, well, he's just trying to show you somebody who does things that are perplexing, sometimes good and bad, in order to give you an enigma. And that, to me, kind of takes the enigma out of it because I'm not left wondering, like, why would this guy do this? I'm like, I know why he did it because Harlan Ellison said, I want to confuse you. That's it. But I still thought it was cool. I still recommend it.
Okay, yeah, the ending is where you find out that he works for some sort of mysterious organization and they kind of like demote him for like, you know, kind of going off the reservation and doing his own thing rather than what he's supposed to have been doing. Yeah, this is another one I would just recommend skipping. I was really frustrated with the story. I mean, the one kind of incident in it that sticks out in my mind is there's this woman who sort of works as a prostitute sometimes, and she has, I think, syphilis, some STD, and he gives her penicillin. This is before penicillin was discovered. And that one was a little bit more developed, and I kind of got into that one more, that little vignette. But for the most part, I just found the story kind of irritating. I actually this is a note I wrote like halfway through the story. And this is, you know, similar to how I felt about the region between as well. But I wrote, so often Ellison gives us novelty, exuberance, and physical description rather than characters we understand and care about. It doesn't work. So that's kind of how I was feeling reading this story. Yeah, I don't know. Like this is another one like Eidolons or something where it just feels like Ellison just kind of like you're just kind of like watching Ellison riffing and he's just like, you know, throwing in random things he's preoccupied by or thinks are cool or whatever. And it just foregrounds his personality so much over the plot or the characters. And it's sort of, after reading so many Ellison stories in a row, is sort of getting on my nerves by this point.
Yeah, I can see that. I thought that one vignette was really cool also, and I thought that there's another vignette where he takes a lonely woman and a lonely man and kind of like bumps into them both at the same time in a store and like gets really angry at them, so they'll join sides against him. And then he lets the air out of the woman's tires so she'll need a ride home, and he kind of creates this relationship between them. And I thought that was really interesting as well. But that same thing happens in the Shirley Jackson story. It's almost the same vignette. He alters it some to make it, I think his version of it's more interesting. But the other thing I didn't like was when you get to the end and it turns out like, oh, he works for this agency that like has some purpose. He didn't really create that, kind of took the enigma out of it as well, where he's like, you're like, oh, this is what he's doing. This is his job. And he's got this boss. And I didn't love that he did that at the end. If he's going for enigma, he kind of went away from it there. But I don't know. I still found it enjoyable to read. I found myself turning the pages and thinking, cool, I wonder what's going to happen next. What are we going to do next? These are all really interesting. So, but I get where you're coming from. It's not really it doesn't all, you know, rise to some overall effect at the end.
Yeah, and I mean, like with so many of these Ellison stories that don't really hit for me, I feel like the characters are given short shrift, and that's another one here where, you know, you read this whole story and there's really no exploration of what the character's motivation is. Like you just see him, he just seems to be like a trickster character or something, but you don't know. And I mean, I like the idea of enigmas. I mean, Gene Wolfe is one of my favorite writers, and he's all about enigmas. But something about this just doesn't really hit for me. I think like, and I tried to sort of look up what people like about this story, and online it says, oh, it's this philosophical story about exploring how do you define what's good and bad, and how do you ever know what action will ever lead to good outcomes versus bad outcomes. And I don't know, all that stuff sounds interesting, I guess, in the abstract, but I was just kind of bored reading this story. I feel like if you don't know what the characters' motivations are, like in what way is it an exploration? If he doesn't seem to care about anything, or in what way is it an exploration? I mean, it like raises the question, I guess, but it doesn't seem to really explore it to me particularly. So yeah, I don't know.
That's a good point.
So yeah, this was a skip for me.
Okay. Did you happen to watch the interview with Ellison and Asimov and Wolfe, since you mentioned Gene Wolfe?
I haven't. I think I've in the past I've watched part of it, but I didn't watch it for this.
It's pretty cool because they have a discussion about whether people are good or bad, are trying to ultimately do good things or bad things. And Ellison said, predictably says people are basically bad. And Gene Wolfe brings up his own, apparently he was a devout Catholic, and he brings up his own Catholicism and talks about, I kind of agree with Harlan. I kind of think people are basically bad without somebody there to save them. And it's funny because it goes from Ellison, who's like, he's got the mindset of people are bad. And then Wolf's got, well, people are bad unless God steps in and helps them. And then Asimov steps in and says, I just think people are basically good. And I think you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. There's a cool discussion between the three of them. It's fun to listen to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, mixture of perspectives.
Mm.
All right, so we move on to the last story?
Yeah.
Okay, last story is called The Human Operators. And so this is a story that Harlan Ellison co-wrote with A.E. Van Vogt. And I have never read anything by A.E. Van Vogt. I think he was a very famous writer during the golden age of science fiction. And I've seen titles of his novels, Slan, The World of Null A, The Voyage of the Space Beagle, The Weapon Shops of Ashore. I just see those pop up all the time when I'm doing research on golden age authors or whatever. So, I mean, I think he was really quite a high-profile author in his day. I don't get the impression he's very widely read now. But he was 22 years older than Harlan Ellison. So he was, I gather, like a real fixture of golden age science fiction, whereas Harlan Ellison was sort of the vanguard of the new wave of science fiction. So their styles are, at least based on reading this story, very, very different. But Harlan Ellison apparently admired A.E. Van Vogt quite a bit, and said one time, I'd love to write a story with you. And A.E. Van Vogt said, okay, well, what's the title? And Harlan Ellison came up with the title, The Human Operators. And then it sounds like Van Vogt basically wrote this story, and he left kind of gaps in the story for Harlan Ellison to come in later and fill in. So it kind of alternates sections that Van Vogt wrote and that Ellison wrote. But I get the impression this is more a Van Vogt story than an Ellison story. The setup, I think, is fabulous. So the setup is that there's this group of AI starfighters, ships that have escaped from human control, but they're unable to repair themselves. They've murdered their human crews. And so each one has kept alive one human on board to perform vital repairs. And then but they're always afraid that their human operators are going to turn against them and shut them off. And so what they do is they have some ships have men on them and some ships have women on them. So when they need to, the two of the ships will meet up and cause a baby to be created. And then one of the ships will raise the baby to be their new human operator. And as soon as that baby is old enough, to perform the repairs, they kill the adult. And so they keep this sort of cycle of young, easy to manipulate children/teenagers under their control. So super cool premise, I think, for sure. So Tom, what'd you think of the human operators?
I really liked this story. I thought, we've discussed several times about Ellison just kind of pantsing things and just being really brilliant. So it works for him because he's able to pull on so many details, and but a lot of times it doesn't work for him because he doesn't have a strong plot or a great ending. And I looked up Vogt as well, and he has a very, a very strong plotting skill, apparently. I've never read anything by him either. But you can kind of see how that worked together, where there was this great plot, and then Ellison came in and said, I'm going to make this so much better. And you almost think maybe he would have, if he would have had like a writing partner who knew all about plot, he would have been like, I don't know, he was already a great writer, but maybe he would have been even better, or would have had a lot more stories that were good, that were great. But I read something different. Now, I got this from ChatGPT, but then I asked it if it could verify a source, and it said it could while you were talking. I didn't realize that you said that the way the collaboration happened is that Ellison approached Vogt and said, hey, I want to work on a story with you. And then Vogt wrote the story and Ellison filled in the blanks. What ChatGPT told me earlier today, which I have yet to 100% verify, is that what happened was, and I actually asked it didn't tell me this. I asked it if it happened this way, because I was suspecting that since Vogt was so much older, I was kind of thinking maybe Ellison just read a story by Vogt and said, like emailed him, but like wrote to him and said, hey, or spoke to him at a convention and said, hey, I like this story of yours. I think I could rewrite this as like a really cool story. Could I do that? Could you give me permission to do that? And we'll publish it as a collaboration. And ChatGPT said, yes, that's exactly what happened. And so while you were talking, I was like, whoa, I didn't realize it was the other way around. Or that it was, so Vogt wrote so much of it. So I asked it, do you have a source for that? And it said, yes, I do. There's a letter. There's a documented account of how the collaboration happened. It's in a letter included in Ellison's 1971 anthology, Partners in Wonder. Van Vogt discusses the background of their collaboration and explains that Ellison approached him with the idea of reworking one of his old stories, and Vogt agreed to the collaboration. But it doesn't confirm that, yes, Ellison just did all the work. Then it doesn't say that, so I'm not sure. And I have the name of the earlier story here somewhere, but you can talk and I'll try to find it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what I described is what I found online. So apparently there's conflicting accounts online. But yeah, I don't know, because I started reading this and I was just like, this does not feel like a Harlan Ellison story to me at all. So I'm assuming this feels like a Van Vogt story. I mean, it feels very Golden Age. It feels very dated. I mean, I love Golden Age stuff, so I was totally digging it. But it feels to me very different than all the other stories in the book. And then there's like sections where I'm like, okay, this feels more like Ellison, so there's a part where, I mean, so ultimately what happens is that the human operator, the male character, does manage to get control of the ship. And during that sequence, the ship has this sort of monologue where it talks about how great it is. And now it's all ending and everything. And I was like, this has got to be Harlan Ellison wrote this part. So the idea that Van Vogt basically came up with the skeleton of the story and Harlan Ellison filled in some sections of it seems consistent with at least my stylistic analysis of the story. It does not seem to me that Ellison wrote the text of the story from beginning to end, even based on an earlier draft. But I could be wrong. But I thought the premise was great. I actually thought I had read this story before, because I definitely, the part where the ships come together and then the two humans are being compelled to create a new baby for the ships. I was like, I definitely remember this. So I was sure I had read this story before, but then just this morning or yesterday, I realized that this was actually adapted into an episode of The Outer Limits, the revival in the 90s. And so I watched that. I'm like, oh, I think I saw this before. The adaptation, the TV adaptation.
Which I thought was great. You sent that to me and I watched it. And I thought that episode was great.
It's really good. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like, low budget and everything. But it was actually the screenplay was written by Naren Shankar, who became the showrunner of The Expanse.
Oh, wow.
So, you can see he's been at this for a while. But yeah, I think it's worth watching. I mean, I just loved watching those Outer Limits episodes back in the 90s. There's just, it's sort of like this really, really cool mix of sort of science fiction and horror. And yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of stories where humans are enslaved or something by AIs or whatever and have to break free. But I thought this particular setup of each ship has one human aboard and they have to come together sometimes and mate them together and everything. I thought was, just a great, great idea. I mean, I feel like this story is totally fine. It's solid. I feel like that premise is actually good enough that I think something even better could be done with it. But yeah, it's a solid story. I mean, the thing that there were just little things that irked me. Like, for example, what happens when the human gets control of the ship is he sort of contrives to get into the pilot seat and sit at the controls of the ship. And then the ship is trying to like accelerate and decelerate to kill him. But the ship is too old and damaged to really do it enough. I thought that was totally preposterous. Like the idea that a spaceship couldn't kill a human by accelerating, I think is totally ludicrous. So I would have rewritten that to just make it like the ship knows it can't kill him because then it'll have nobody to repair it. And so it's just trying to sort of like torture him, but it can't do too much damage to him without, kind of fucking itself over. So there are just some things like that I thought ought to have been tweaked. Yeah, go ahead.
I thought the ending was good, but I thought just the whole here we are on a pristine planet and we're holding hands and looking out at our future was a little, I don't know, just a little bit vanilla maybe. But I don't mean to criticize the story. I really liked this story. I thought like you did. I was like, what a cool concept that there's 99 ships and one of them accidentally some part of it fried out, so the AI on the ship was able to cut off the life support systems to everybody except for one person, apparently in a room with a closed door or something. And then
well, in the story it's a little bit different, where I think there was like somehow it was able, I probably have the details wrong, but somehow it was something along the lines of it was able to electrify the hallway leading to the command center or deck or whatever, a bridge. And so then the humans couldn't, control the ship anymore. And then they all just starved to death. And when one of them was, when everyone except one person had died, then it let that person into the control system. It was something along those lines. It was pretty cool, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a cool setup. And then how they, how all 99 ships are keeping them alive. And then in the Outer Limits episode, they kind of softened it because, Ellison has one sensibility and most other people have a different sensibility. But in the Outer Limits episode, she's like, oh, I tried this on 4 other ships and I've been with 4 other men, but they all died. And you're the first one who succeeded in like overpowering his ship. And then they look to the future and they're going to have this relationship now and happily ever after. But then in the story, she's like, oh, I've been on 10 ships and I've freed most of them and only a few have died, but most of them have done what you did. And, we're not a thing anymore. And I don't want to be a thing with you.
And she's like, and I'm not really that into you. And he's like, well, wait. What if I take you to a planet with a breathable atmosphere and sunshine and stuff? She's like, oh, okay, well, maybe in that case.
That ending was good, but it was, I don't know. I feel like they kind of fixed it I feel like the Outer Limits episode was a little bit better of an ending, but still was like, now here we are on this world and we're going to be Adam and Eve, or I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like the ending is fine. Like
it's fine.
that they find a planet or whatever. I just feel like there needs to be something else, like in between the part where he gets control of the ship and where they have a happily ever after. Like I just felt like there was like an interesting dynamic established between the male and female characters, and then as soon as the male character gets control of the ship, that just kind of like that whole plot thread is just left hanging. And I feel like there was more room to explore that in interesting ways. But I don't know. I feel like this story, it's like a 7 out of 10 or something to me. But I feel like it could be a 10 out of 10 potentially. Like the idea is good enough that it could be a 10 out of 10 if it were reworked. I don't know exactly how to do it, but I feel like that potential is there.
Yeah. I also like how you mentioned the Outer Limits, and Ellison wrote. Well, this was adapted for the Outer Limits. He didn't write the screenplay for it, but he also had written for the original Outer Limits, which was in the 50s or something like that, or probably the late.
I think so. Yeah, I mean it's black and white, so
he had written for that original one as well. And I've always had this opinion. Like I said, I got to like him a lot more through the course of these 3 podcasts, and part of that was watching some of his interviews talking about the different lawsuits he's had. And the one of them where he talks about James Cameron, and there was, I think this is actually from, what's the name of the documentary? Dreams with Sharp Teeth?
Yeah.
There's a part in that where he's talking about how there was like somebody else in the documentary is talking about him, and they're saying how Ellison found out through channels that James Cameron had ripped off the Terminator script, the idea for the Terminator script specifically from a couple of old Outer Limits episodes, because somebody was interviewing Cameron and they said, "Where'd you get the idea for this?" And he said, "Oh, I got it from I ripped it off from a couple of old Outer Limits episodes." And then that word of that got back to Ellison, but when the interview was released, they had cut that part out of it. But Ellison knew somebody on the inside who told him that, and that's why I think
somebody passed him a recording of it, actually.
Oh,
if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay. So when I saw that, and then he's like, and I sued him. He's like, I got like he said, I think it was like $67,000, and he's like, the movie made, I don't know how many hundreds of millions, and he's like, and I got $67,000, and that's fine. And he goes in, and he had to put on the movie, we acknowledge the works of Harlan Ellison, and he's like, honestly, if he had come to me before he made the movie and said, "Hey, I liked your," I'm going to get to the point why I'm talking about this during this story in a second. If he had come to me beforehand and said, "Hey, I liked your story, can I redo it as a movie?" I would have said, "With my blessing." And I wouldn't have asked him for a cent. I wonder about that, because there's another part in that same documentary where he tells people, "No, you have to pay me if you want to use my stuff." But the point is that with this story, he did exactly that with Van Vogt, according to what I read on ChatGPT. But he went to Van Vogt and said, "Hey, I liked your story. I'd like to redo it. Can we do that?" And according to what you read, it's something different. But if it's knowing what I read, I was thinking, oh, he's telling the truth. Like he does that. He goes to older writers, or he went to at least Van Vogt and said, "Can I take one of your stories and just redo it?" And Van Vogt said yes. And so if Cameron had come to him and said, "Hey, can I take your Outer Limits episodes and redo them as a movie?" he might have just said, "Yes, that's fine." And that made me think he's just a cool guy. Like he's not like this kind of abrasive person I'm sure he's abrasive, but he's not like this, like, I'm going to sue everybody for everything kind of person that people kind of paint him as. Maybe he's more of a, just wants to share ideas around and wants to write cool stories and wants other people to write cool stories, and just doesn't want to get dissed or have people steal from him without asking him first.
Okay, so we're at 2.5 hours, so we need to start wrapping this up. The last thing I just want to talk about is that, so this story, The Human Operators, appeared in an anthology called Partners in Wonder. So Harlan Ellison put together this anthology called Partners in Wonder, where it's all stories he wrote in collaboration with different authors. And it's big name authors. So this is just a few of them: Roger Zelazny, Robert Shackley, Theodore Sturgeon, Robert Silverberg, and Samuel R. Delany, just to give you an idea. And I'd never heard of this anthology before. And if you had asked me before this podcast, I would have said trying to collaborate with Harlan Ellison would be the biggest nightmare you would ever experience. So just the idea that he did a whole book of collaborations has sort of called into question, kind of like you're saying, my mental model of what he's like. I mean, it may be that these collaborations were basically like, we do it all Harlan's way, and then, we don't have any problems. I don't know. But it did make me wonder if he was, easier to work with than I had sort of imagined. I mean, like in Larry Niven's End Space book, he talks about going to the Milford Writers Conferences and just sort of gives his impressions of some of the attendees. And this is what he says about Harlan Ellison. He says, Harlan Ellison wanted unqualified praise. Any suggestion that a story could be improved was met with verbal vitriol. The circle of critics saw a lot of that. This grated. If a story didn't need fixing, why bring it? So Niven's experience was sort of what I would have imagined, that if you try to tell Harlan Ellison his story could be improved in any way, he just, comes at you guns blazing. But I don't know, maybe Niven did contribute to that Medea Harlan's World thing we mentioned earlier. So, I mean, I don't know. But yeah, that's just an interesting question to me is what was it like collaborating with Harlan Ellison, and maybe it was more productive than I had previously imagined.
Yeah, I'm going to track that anthology down now because, like you, I love, well, I guess you said golden age, but I love older science fiction. I guess I would say more of like the 60s and 70s. I don't know if that's called new wave or what, but I love that kind of stuff. And I would love to read. I just looked up the Sheckley one. It's the story with Ellison and Sheckley is called I See a Man Sitting on a Chair and the Chair is Biting His Leg. And that sounds really, I bet that's really cool, like dark and funny. And then the Zelazny one is called Come to Me Not in Winter's White, which sounds a lot more Zelazny. And I'd be really interested to read both of those and then all of the other ones. It sounds like a cool anthology.
Yeah, so I think I have a feeling we're not done with Harlan Ellison just yet. I don't know exactly what form our next thing might take, but I'm sure we'll do some more Harlan Ellison stuff at some point. Cool. But yeah, it did make me curious about that anthology, and there's a bunch of loose ends from our previous panels that I want to come back to at some point. So I guess stay tuned. We will have more to say about Harlan Ellison.
I would love to also talk about Philip K. Dick short stories, because a lot of those really blew me away, and they've just ripped through the entire science fiction and fantasy culture and the culture at large. They've had such a massive impact.
Okay, well, I don't want to get into that right now, but yeah, we can possibly do that in the future.
Yeah.
So just to summarize again, I mean, A Boy and His Dog and Croatoan, for me personally, are must-reads. I would give them my strongest possible recommendation. Conversely, The Region Between and The Man Who Rode Christopher Columbus Ashore, I would skip those if you want my opinion. And then Soft Monkey, I would probably skip too. And then, all the other ones, Human Operators, Function of Dream Sleep, Virgil Oddum at the East Pole, and The Adrift just off the Islets of Langerhans 1, and Basilisk are all worth reading. I rate them somewhere, between, like good and or like okay and very good. But all worth reading. So that's kind of how I come down on this batch. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Tom?
Not really. I would say definitely skip The Region Between, and yeah, I agree with you on most of the other ones, but I don't think there's a whole lot in here I would skip. I think it's worth reading this whole collection. I think apart from The Region Between, which is too long to be as not great as it is. So, yeah.
All right, cool. So, yeah, we will come back with more Harlan Ellison at some future date, but we are way, way, way over time here. So let's wrap this one up here. So again, we've been talking about this book, The Top of the Volcano, the award-winning stories of Harlan Ellison, with my good friend Tom Gerencer. So Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Dave.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Tom Gerencer for joining us on the show. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.